welcome to our agenda forum. I'll read the disclaimer. Agenda forums are specifically for agenda items which are to be considered by Council at the next ordinary meeting of Council. Agenda forums are not decision-making forums. They provide an opportunity for councillors to be equally informed and seek additional information on matters prior to the presentation of such matters to the next ordinary meeting of Council for formal consideration and decision. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed. This recording will also be archived and made available on the Council's website after the meeting. If you choose to participate in a meeting during public question time and deputation time, it is assumed that your consent is given for the audio to be recorded. Please keep your comments respectful to councillors and other members of the community. Visual images of the public will not be captured. Leave of absence, Mr. CEO. At this point in time, I have nil. Apologies. I have an apology from Councillor Prodovnik. Are there any other apologies, Mr. CEO?
No, Mr. Mayor. Everyone else is present.
Okay. Declarations of financial and proximity interest and interests affecting impartiality.
Mr. Mayor, Councillor Parry's expressed an impartiality in item 13.5. That's proposed classrooms additions to an existing place of worship at 25 Suffolk Street. In that the manager is an acquaintance of his who has worked with him before. Councillor Charlie Zanino has expressed an impartiality in item 1.7, that's the Middleton Oval Redevelopment Urban Design Guidelines, in that he has business partners who own land on the Crescent in Midland. Councillor Congleton has expressed an impartiality in relation to item 3.6, that's the proposed recreation centre, in that the Burgess Design Group has provided services for him in the past. And in relation to item 3.7, Councillor Rod Henderson has expressed a proximity interest as the agricultural intensive mushroom farm is adjacent to his property, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. CEO. Anyone else have any declarations? Thank you. Move now to public question time and questions relating to reports contained in the agenda. The first question is from Mr. Michael Tate. And Mr. Russell, do you wish to answer that question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the question for the benefit of parties is, how can the applicant guarantee there will be no odour or ash? Now, that's the question. I can't answer that. That speaks to the specifications and operation procedures of the crematorium, so I'm not in a position to answer that. That would be up for the applicant. However, the second part is, if it does occur, and that by that I mean if it does occur, the odour or ash, will this be considered accepted by the City of Swan? Well, certainly if we had issues, if this was to proceed and we had issues with the crematorium emitting odour or ash, contrary to the claimed specifications by Crematorium Australia Incorporated and the system that they will use, if we got such complaints, we would certainly take it up with them, and there may be opportunity to take action pursuant to the Health Act, or alternatively, we may have recourse to refer those complaints to the state government that licenses or will grant a licence to operate a crematorium if that were to occur, and they may have provision to take action under that legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. Also have questions from Mr. Otto Weinbreck. Mr. Russell, will you like to answer those, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I've answered the first question, is what is the recourse? I suppose a complainant can complain to the city. They may also complain to the health department that licenses these things, and action as provided can be taken in relation to those. Who do we make a claim on? Again, answering that, it could be a complaint to the city and or the health department, state health department. In relation to question 2, what is the recourse when the statistics and information provided by the crematorium is incorrect? I can't answer that specifically. We're operating on a claimed specification, or the crematorium's operating on a claimed specification of performance. Again, it may well be that's a complaint that can be made to the agency, the health department that licenses the operation of the crematorium. In relation to question 3, what is the recourse when I wish to sell my property and its value is decreased because of being next door to a crematorium? That's a hypothetical, Mr. Mayor. Certainly the valuation of a property insofar as it's a planning matter, is only a manifestation of an impact. That is what we're considering here. If the impact is considered to be negligible, then we would say then that's the city's position and that's the outcome of the development application. The market value is what the market value is, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Russell. Any further public questions regarding to items on the agenda? No, thank you. It takes us now to reports, motions for which previous notice has been given, and presentations and deputation. The first presentation is item 13.6, the proposed classrooms additions to an existing place of worship at Lot 101, number 25, Suffolk Street, Caversham. And the first speaker is Ms Alison Cundard.
No, Mr Alan Gaudet on this one.
Oh, he is speaking, is he? Okay, my apologies. Mr Alan Gaudet.
Is it?
I tried to get rid of you altogether, Alan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and councillors, member of the staff. Thank you for allowing me to speak on behalf of the Swan Valley SVTA, the Swan Valley Tourists Alliance. The Alliance would firstly like to thank the Council for deferring this application for the February meeting. This has allowed the SVTA the time to review the application in more details. During this review, we provided a list of questions via Councillor Zanino to the city planners. The Planning Department have kindly answered all but 2 of those questions. We have provided councillors with a list of questions and answers, but would like to know the answers to question 9 and 16. We are concerned that the application by the West Australian Chin Christian Church for approval is very vague as to 1, the reason why so many classrooms are sought, the periods and days of intended use for Sunday schooling, and the use of other than Sunday schooling classes for which the classroom might be used in the interim. We've learned through discussion with other religious organisations with similar numbers of children and observe that point 1 is that Sunday school is frequently taught over different intervals during the Sunday to accommodate parents, children and also the instructors. 8 classrooms far exceeds the number of Sunday school classrooms normally used or sought. And more to that, the West Australian Chin Community Church would be expected to use for Sunday school purposes. A more usual classroom number would greatly reduce the development footprint and parking needed. Under the original proposed place of worship DA 529-14 approval, a condition that landscaping would be undertaken at the completion of the build was imposed to contribute to the Swan Valley ambience. One major component of this was that the area of the vines was to be planted between the car park and Suffolk Street boundary. 6 years on, and this has not been started. We believe that any approval of the current application, if given, should be made conditional upon the proponents first completing the condition to the satisfactory state. We still are very concerned that this development will at some stage in the future morph into a school or some form of kindergarten or childcare facility from Monday to Friday. At the January meeting, Councillor Parry referred to the development on a number of occasions as a school. Further, it seems to be becoming in vogue for proponents to suggest a SAT appeal would follow a council refusal. Whilst it is true that such appeal would incur city cost, it is also true that the approval, granted mostly because of cost risk, often leads to both very inconsistent application outcomes and to such appeals being presented as endorsed by the council when it's in fact there may be a preference to refusal if it weren't for the appeal cost risk. Under these circumstances, the SVTA supports the SVPC's recommendation and that of Councillor Zanino's to refuse this application. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. G'day. Any questions, councillors?
To staff, Mayor.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Alan. Councillor Scanlon was first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question for the planning staff is to ask, how does this Sunday school differ from other schools in the area, such as Swan Christian?
Mr. Russell.
Well, as I understand it, a Sunday school is just that. It's the provision of facilities where, at least as I connotate the traditional meaning of a Sunday school, they might teach some form of religious instruction or religious studies on the Sunday. So effectively, if it's a Sunday school, it's an educational facility once a week on a Sunday, as opposed to a broader school that might have a broader curriculum. They might be operating Monday to Friday, Mr. Mayor. That would be my understanding.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. Councillor Coley.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to know, is the CEO aware of, or was an approach made to the city re the funding offered to the church in respect of the facility? What advice was given to the minister in respect of approving the funding, or indication? Was there any indication given that council may approve or may not approve this?
Mr. CEO.
I'm not aware of any funding request to the city or to anyone else, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. CEO. No further questions, councillors? Thank you. And next deputation on the same item is either Mr. Mark Beasley or Mr. Andrew Roberts.
Mark Beasley.
From Maple Building, the applicant speaking in support of the recommendation. Which one do we have?
Mark Beasley.
Thank you, Mr. Beasley. You have 5 minutes.
Set up. Thank you, Mayor and City of Swan Council. I'm speaking in support of the proposed development. I feel the planning report recommendations give enough weight to the development's potential to be approved. I feel that the planning recommendations within the report are reasonable to all stakeholders and very achievable. I'd like to provide a little bit of further clarification on a few of the items raised by the Swan Valley Tourist Alliance. I'll just confirm that we're not making application for a school facility as such, and at this stage I have no intention to run an education facility out of the development. This would be subject to an additional application of change of use at a later stage if that ever becomes apparent, and I just urge that the application's read under the proposed use and not any deferred use. The government grant, so the church has made an application and had a preliminary approval for funding through the Community Developments grant program, and the funding's subject to a planning approval for the development. So no funding will be made available unless the project goes ahead. In relation to the excessive numbers, or the thought on the excessive numbers of classrooms, the church has approximately 250 Sunday school children connected to the Sunday school congregation. There's an average of 180 children on average attend. The church breaks them up into about 8 groups of around 30 students max, approximately, hence why we've made application for 8 separable areas. The Sunday school is currently located inside a reception hall and 3 small meeting rooms. This is located opposite the auditorium, and there's often a lot of clash between noise and activities being undertaken in both. the current combined areas of the reception hall and the three small meeting rooms, which the current operations of the Sunday school are held in, are 298 square metres combined. We're making application for a building of 345 square metres, which I think is comparable in relation to what's already being used there at the church at the moment. We've also designed the classrooms to be flexible in regards to having operable walls in between the areas, so the areas can actually be split between 4 and 8 separable rooms. And the intention of the proposed building is to provide that buffer between the two, the main hall auditorium, congregation, and the kids' church Sunday school. The areas utilised currently for the Sunday school would then be utilised for other proposed uses, such as they're currently short on space, office space for administration staff, and the main reception hall is being used as a multi-function area, which has to be broken down and re-established in between services.
Yeah, 1 minute, Mr Beasley.
Thank you very much. There also was a concern raised regarding use of outside groups using the facility. The church sees the facility as a primary use to accommodate the Sunday school program. The facility is the potential to be used by those community groups. It's not the church's intention to advertise, market off the facility, but to offer the space for free for community groups that are aware that the space is available, and also groups associated with members of the congregation. Hours of operation would be dependent on who is going to use the facility, but based as a Sunday school program, basically you could slot away the whole of Sunday intermittently for use of the facility. So, but that would be the main use on that Sunday service.
Okay. Thank you, Mr Beasley. Questions to Mr Beasley, councillors? Councillor Henderson, you were first.
Thank you, Mr Beasley. One of the concerns raised, and I believe a significant concern, is the screening of the church facility and the car park and its lighting.
Yeah.
What guarantee has been provided to ensure that we see adequate and complete screening of the facility?
Yeah, sure. So I noticed that was formed part of the recommendations of planning. I would assume that being a planning condition, that condition would need to be met prior to occupation of the building. So, yeah, the use of the building would be dependent on the screening or the treatment or whatever it may be being installed.
Another question, if I just to expand,
Yes,
if I
go
may.
ahead.
Yeah.
Clearly that would be associated with the development.
Sure.
That's one area. But the rest of the area is supposed to be screened as well.
Yeah.
Are we talking about the whole area or just that bit?
Look, if planning conditions hadn't been met on the prior planning and building application, we're happy to review those as part of the new application. I know that they have lost a lot of trees. I know they did do a lot of planting, and they have lost a lot of trees in the last 12 months as well. And those, because of the weather and the seasons changing, we haven't been able to, or the trees haven't established as quick as we hoped they would as well. But we're happy to revisit and review all that as part of a prior planning agreement or a subject landscape plan. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Coley.
Thank you. Mark, from your deputation, it seemed to be a little bit different from last few weeks ago. This time round, it seemed to be that you were conceding that in the future there potentially will be an application or could be an application for a school on site. Is that correct?
Look, there's no intention at this stage. Never was. I think I was listening back to the council. I weren't present at the last council meeting. I was out of state. But there was no intention to. I think there was some confusion by the sound of it through conversation, and there was also some confusion on the documentation I saw from the Swan Valley Tourist Alliance. There's definitely no intention for the school or the facility to ever be used as a school. the sole application or the sole use is for that Sunday school program. So,
And do you know if there's been any testing of noise distances or an assessment done of noise, because you've got residential areas being so close to that area?
Yeah.
On a Sunday, you might, with so many classes and so many students, you might find that there is going to be a lot of complaints. Has there been any assessment done of that?
So for the original church building, which would generate far more, they use amplified music and amplified sound in the building. So I feel that would have more impact, and that passed all of the acoustic requirements on completion. Part of the original application, I know there was a buffer, and there was discussions about where the church was positioned in relation to the residential zone on the west side. And part of that was the extension of that retaining wall being increased, and a fence, I think, in a part of it being established on top of that retaining as well. But we also had to plant out in front of that as well. And I know that was part of the methodology there to mitigate some of that acoustic.
Were they conditions in the original approval back in 2014?
I would have to look back at the application, but I'm pretty sure the acoustic report was.
The report I've got in front of me here says that the approval in 2014 required landscaping to between Suffolk Street and the car park.
Yeah.
Have you ever been asked to complete that by City of Swan?
I know some went in, but no, we haven't had any feedback. Whether the church has or not, I would have to ask the church leaders. Yeah.
Thanks, Mark. And just a question to staff.
Yep, one moment. Councillor Richards, do you have a question?
Just wanted to ask, is there currently a playground on that site, and will they be developing a larger playground then for use for 180 children in break time?
No.
There's no
There's
playground?
no playground that I'm aware of.
Okay.
And it hasn't been raised with me through the church that there ever will be.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Any further questions of Mr Beasley, councillors? No, thank you, Mr Beasley.
Thank you.
Councillor Kiley, you had a question to staff.
I'm not too sure who's going to answer this one, Mayor,
Well,
but
ask me as per protocol and I'll direct it to someone.
thank you, Mayor. We've just heard from Mark Beasley that nobody from council's come and said you've got to put in this screening or this plantings between Suffolk Street and the car park. Why haven't the staff followed this up, given it was a condition put in place for occupation back in 2014?
I think he stated he wasn't aware personally. Mr Russell, have you got an answer for that?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm not about to offer any excuses other than, often is the case, we often await any contentions or complaints of surrounding residents or other parties as to whether or not compliance is achieved. We do, certainly with different conditions that have checkpoints on them, prior to the issue of a building permit or prior to the occupation, a check-up on these things. But suffice to say that if the question really is, if it hasn't been done, can we follow it up and direct the proponents to install the screening? The answer to that, Mr Mayor, is a big yes.
Thank you. Further questions, councillors? Thank you. That now takes on to Part B, and item 1.5 is the establishment of a design review panel, and Mr Patrick Irwin speaking against the recommendation. Mr Irwin.
Mr Mayor, on this item, my only real concern is that we have effective, independent input, and that we have community input into the design panel. That's really...
Is that it, Mr Irwin?
That
okay.
is, I'm afraid that's all I've got to say on that, but it's the makeup of the panel.
Thank you.
that
Appreciate
is
your
of
comment.
concern.
Questions, councillors? Thank you, Mr. Councillor Scanlon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Owen, I'd just like to ask you whether you feel there's any professionals that the panel could benefit from, such as heritage architects, any horticulturists or any other professionals as such?
Absolutely. Horticulturalist is an important one rather than a landscape architect, because a horticulturalist will have more knowledge of appropriate planting. I think rather than, as in the past, having a single heritage consultant, it might be better to have a heritage panel which could include professionals and community representatives.
Thank you, Mr. Owen.
Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Mr. Mayor. Mr. Owen, could you tell us what academic qualifications an expert in heritage would have?
Well, generally, they may come from a historian basis. They may come from an architect basis, as I do. So I'm an architect with heritage expertise, and there's a registration system you can go through to be registered as a consultant with HECWA. Unfortunately, now you have to pay to be on that register. But you have engineers who are consultant heritage engineers. You have archaeologists, anthropologists, and there are many professions. I mean, people like Shane Burke, Professor Shane Burke, is, as you probably know, is one of the great experts on the Swan Valley, because that's been his one of his main focuses through his professional career. And it's always great to have Shane offer his input.
Okay. Further question, Councillor Johnson?
Yeah, just to follow up, Mr. Mayor. Professor Shane Burks, what's his academic background?
Well, Councillor, I don't think we should take that question because that's preempting a pre-selection, and this is a pre-selection expression of interest when it goes out. So
I understand, Mr. Mayor.
I would
I'm trying
probably
to
not take that question.
I'm trying to understand what sort of academic background.
Well, he's an archaeologist.
Archaeologist, okay, that's fair enough. And the second question is, what is HECWA?
Heritage Council of Western Australia.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Irwin, and you may as well stay there, given that you're first up on 1.6. Now, just a quick question. Given that 1.6 and 1.7 are fairly similar, could you wrap those into one, perhaps?
Actually, with apologies, Mr. Mayor, I see them as rather different.
Okay, no, that's fine. I just asked a question, so you can carry on, and you've got 5
I agree.
minutes.
I certainly agree they're connected, and there's a great deal of overlap, but I
just asked
prefer
a question,
to tackle them.
You could commence
separately.
on 1.6, and you've got 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. These guidelines, I think they're very important, and there are some concerns, which is why I don't think they should go ahead for advertising. I think they need to be completely re-examined, and I'll try and, in the short time I have, try and explain my concerns. Small examples are that photographs show places other than Midland of mainly 3-storey, while the guidelines show mainly 6-storey, and while Midland itself is largely 2-storey. The only 6-storey buildings in Midland are those that have been built in the last few years or are under construction. In the guidelines, there is only one photograph of a Midland streetscape. There are lots of photographs of other streetscapes, including one that looks like Melbourne, which has trees down the middle. Nothing like that is proposed anywhere in these guidelines. So we have images which suggest one thing, but text and diagrams which suggest something altogether different. There are inconsistencies within the document with itself and inconsistencies of the guidelines with Midland. At no stage in the guidelines is there any mention made of the fact that Midland is a heritage gold rush town. There's no text of it, no recognition of it, no discussion of this very important basic fact when I'm talking about the old heritage centre of Midland. And I would like to ask, is the council aware of the condition of planning blight? I raise the question rhetorically because I'm going to explain what it is, in case you're not aware of planning blight. Planning blight is blight caused by planning decisions and policies. For example, taking these guidelines, by rezoning or recommending that existing 2 stories are to become 6 or 7 story, the policy or the guidelines would encourage owners to land bank, to defer any improvement of the existing heritage properties, for example, and seek return by eventual demolition or sale, or both, and building new 6-story properties, maximising their value, as these guidelines would appear to suggest. So, whereas the guidelines have sections talking about heritage, the main thrust of the guidelines would appear to be anything but to preserve heritage, but in fact to encourage and accelerate redevelopment and destruction of heritage. While I'm talking about heritage, which is I'm here representing the Midlands Society, and this is what we're really concerned about. And I mean, there are many of you who've heard me in this place before talking about heritage places. These guidelines have nothing about the streetscape, the heritage streetscape of Midland, which goes back to my first point about no recognition that it's a gold rush town, the old town centre. But you can't take a town and cut it up and only review each individual building. You have to look at the entirety. I have other concerns, other inconsistencies. Why is Central Midland referred to as Midland West End? We have this term on some of the sections referring to active. There's no, in the Town Planning Act, town planning definitions, there's no use known as active, but we have these sections saying commercial or retail, commercial, and active. So it seems that these guidelines, if they're to provide guidance, need to have rigour. They need to be meaningful. They need to use meaningful terms. You can't use terms that have no defined meaning and expect people to know what you're talking about.
Thank you, Mr. Irwin. That's your 5 minutes.
That's my 5 minutes.
Any questions, councillors, to Mr. Irwin? You can wait. Councillor Scanlon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question to you is, Mr. Irwin, is how could the city improve its way of honouring the heritage in Midland in this guidelines?
I think these guidelines need to absolutely start again, and need to start with analysis, survey, analysis, looking at what we've got. Really it's to be honest, the current guidelines read almost as a generic template for guidelines with the term Midland inserted. We need guidelines that relate to the town they're supposed to be talking about. We need, just down the road, council's taken a great step and helped get Guildford on the state register as a place. Now, we've got a very different history here, but this place too has significance, and I would ask council to put their shoulder to the wheel, as they've done with Guildford, and help Midland be reborn as what it is. Think of Hannon Street in Kalgoorlie, where you've got those beautiful streets and verandas. This is what Midland was built in the same period, this gold rush period. If we put the verandas back, if people were encouraged to restore their properties, not just let them rot like the one just across the road here, if we had those 2-story verandas put back, we'd have a place that would bring tourists would bring retail back in, we'd bring life back in, we'd get the whole centre of this town from being a dead heart back to being a live town centre. And these guidelines need to be dealing with these issues right at the very, very, very beginning. And so I would say we need to go right back to the drawing board with these guidelines and re-examine what is the place we're talking about. If you read these guidelines and take the word Midland out, there's nothing there to tell you it's about Midland.
Okay, thank you, Mr Irwin. I think you've answered that question. Further question of Mr Irwin? Yeah, sure. Okay. Councillor Catalano.
Thanks very much. So, do you think these guidelines are really more in keeping with like a sort of as if it was for a greenfield site, like say for just like somewhere where a town didn't already exist, or do you think that they do take that into consideration?
I think if you took out the place names and street names, this might refer to it. Joondalup, which is effectively greenfield sort of development.
Further question?
And so if it's like sort of the guidelines are a bit like what might be appropriate for a greenfield site, then do you think that's appropriate for Midland, a place like Midland?
As I say, Midland has great heritage. It's a pretty unique town. Still has its rural character. It's a railway town. It's got its gold rush heart, and these values, these assets need to be celebrated and enhanced. And rather than, as I say, these guidelines taken on surface value would appear to have no regard at all for these heritage streetscapes, for the fabric, the weft and weave of this old town. I mean, we're in an old building. It's nearly as old. I mean, it's within 20 years as old as the workshops, I think. And interesting to remember that the council voted in 1972 to demolish the building in which we're standing. We need to value what we've got. And
thank you, Mr Irwin. I think that answered the question. Further question, Councillor Richardson.
Yes, Mr Irwin. Do you think that the City of Swan might value from engagement with, say, other towns that have got heritage values, such as York, who predominantly in the last couple of weeks that I visited have got a bustling trade and tourism flourishing there, and some wonderful, obviously, shop fronts and tourism with the heritage that's going on there, that their model is working quite well. Clearly, you can see it when you visit there. You're there on a weekend. Similar to Guildford, is that we're not that possibly we could be following some of their lead in terms of how they're marketing their town and the small changes that have been made in their main street and around their town.
Mr. Irwin to answer the question.
Well, I'd say absolutely yes, and other examples might be Leederville, parts of Fremantle. And even Bassendean recently. If you look at the main street in Bassendean, you've got the old buildings there being repurposed, life and activities coming back into Bassendean. Maylands down the road is thriving in the old fabric, the old buildings being revived, restored, and Maylands is a good example. It's not far down the track. It's gangbusters, and it's not through putting the bulldozers through and building 6 stories. It's through reviving the existing fabric, re-inhabiting.
Thank you, Mr. Irwin. Councillors, I think we've asked Mr. Irwin more than enough questions. We have got just one moment. We've got 21 deputations to get through to. If there's further questions, certainly, but I don't think there's much more Mr. Irwin can answer. Now, okay, well, I'll ask 2 questions, make them short. Mr. Irwin, I will ask you to make the very brief answers. Thank you.
Mr. Irwin, can you just comment on the area that's proposed? We're looking at what sort of public open space, what knowledge of public open space do you have of in that area? How much public open space have we got that you're aware of?
Not much.
Okay, Councillor Catalano, your question?
So I just wanted to ask you, So you're not absolutely opposed to new development in Midland. You can see that there can be a new development kind of mixed in with the heritage buildings, and that would be a good thing for Midland.
Of course, I'm an architect and I design buildings, and I understand the purpose and the contribution that buildings can make to culture and to society and to a town. That's my job. And of course, I understand why buildings can help contribute, but I also understand how they have to play their place in the town, in the place. When I studied architecture in England, the first thing they taught us was what is your first responsibility as an architect, and that was that it's to the community, to the public, not to your client. It's your
Thank you, Mr. Owen. Another
public
question.
art.
This will be the last one. So, Councillor Johnson, if you have one, because you... Oh, staff, right, you can make... Okay. If you keep asking questions, Councillor, we're going to be cutting them down later on to get through the deputations, to give everybody in the audience a fair crack at asking their questions. So, if there's no more questions, Mr. Owen, thank you, Mr. Owen. You may as well stay there because you'll be back later. No, actually, there's another one, so if you could take your seat. Okay, quick questions to staff, please, councillors, and make them quick.
Thank you, Mayor, through you. Excuse me, Councillor Catalano. On page 117, it shows the Midland Oval precinct. It shows further streets being put through the Midland Oval precinct and the public open space being reduced even further. I know it's a shaded area, it's a coloured map, but is this indicative of where we're headed in the future?
Mr. Leon, that would be you, yes. Councillor Calano.
Yes, thank you. I just want to ask a question of the drafter of the provisions, and page 135, which is in the heritage provisions as 2.0, then it's 2.2.5, and I see objective, and then it says that heritage places, that the development accords with heritage places, and then it says heritage places that are identified in the City of Swan's local government inventory and the state register of heritage places. So I just want to know, does that mean that a place has to be on both of those registers or either of those registers? It's not clear to me how that actually, and if it...
Either was the answer.
Well,
either of those.
Okay, and then can I just then ask again, the next question then is, how do we have that redrafted before we vote on it? Because it doesn't read clearly. It should say either of those, because honestly it doesn't read clearly to me, and I am actually a lawyer, and I think these things need to be drafted properly.
Mr. Mayor, the purpose of the report tonight in front of Council is to get Council's resolution on allowing us to advertise it for public comment. So certainly those type of small modifications to the document will be done through that process, and that's the intent, so that when it comes back to Council after all the consultation and input is when Council will have to adopt the final version of the document.
Okay, so the changes won't be occurring before next week?
If there are very specific changes that can be identified before the council meeting next week, those can be listed, and one can add it in a motion in the actual resolution to say that it's the document as is, subject to these modifications, can be advertised. So there's possibility.
Councillor Johnson, you've got a question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, my question relates to page 130. Page 130, you'll see at the bottom there are 5 pictures of streetscapes. Left-hand side, you'll see 2 pictures from Hay Street in central Perth. What the document is saying is historic fabric in Midlands historic core can be incorporated into larger contemporary buildings. My question, Mr. Mayor, is would it not be possible to change the thrust of this document? So in the introduction, we would say that the intention for redeveloping Midland is to retain the existing historic buildings and while rebuilding Midland. So would it be a realistic thing to change this document along those lines? So you'd have to change the entire introduction and the entire strategy. Is that something that would come in after the consultation? Can we achieve that kind of change?
Mr Van Lien?
Mr. Mayor, to address that question, it's important to realise that this document needs to be read with all the other planning documents that relate to the Midland Activity Centre. So those would include the Midland Activity Centre structure plan, the MRA master plan, and the Midland Oval master plan. So in those documents, there, for instance, in the Midland Activity Centre structure plan, there's a whole section that addresses the precinct intent. So the areas is broken up in precincts, and for instance, the Midland West End is a heritage precinct, and in that intent, you'll find what you're after, and if you assess anything in relation to this document, you have to read it with that. So this document refers to that if you read it in context as well.
Thank you, Mr Van Lien.
The intent was not to prepare a document that reiterates everything that's already contained in other documents. So it's very important to make sure that one reads it in context of the other documents.
Okay, thank you very much. Our next speaker on this item is Mr Greg Smith, also speaking against the recommendation. And Mr Smith, you too have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Mr Mayor, councillors, staff and the audience, I'm going to speak on 3 issues that I think are of importance to this document, and they are, in essence, the elephants in the room. The elephants in the room are, in essence, global warming, the changing nature of retail, and context. Okay? Context or lack of context. Now, my name is Greg Smith. I'm a town planner of more than 30 years' experience. I had the privilege of being in the class in Stephen Tan probably 30 years ago as well, and I have also had experience in producing design guidelines. Global warming. This plan will exacerbate the urban heat island effect. No doubt. The plan is to increase the density of Midland significantly, and as a consequence, I would argue that the plan will increase the temperature of Midland by 10 degrees. Yesterday it was 40. What would Midland be like when it was 50? And you can do some research if you like. Dr. Helen Brown produced a paper, or gave a paper. Helen Brown is School of Public Health at Curtin University, on the importance of urban trees to our physical and mental health. And heat-related deaths are already more than deaths from motor vehicles. So this plan is, in essence, a plan to increase the temperature of Midland by 10 degrees. I would argue that's a very bad thing. The other thing in this plan is that it provides for retail. It provides for so much more retail and defines things as commercial and active. Now, your town planning scheme doesn't have a commercial zone, and your town planning scheme doesn't have an active zone. So the design guidelines have sort of got fallacious definitions, nonsensical, fallacious definitions. But the issue with this plan to provide more retail is a complete and utter nonsense. Today's opinion page in the Western Australian is talking about the demise of retailing. Now, people are shopping online, and so the idea that you're going to have a redevelopment of Midland based on the fundamentals of retailing, once again, absolutely and utterly farcical. shops are closing. People are buying online. I don't, but I'm an old fogey. My children do, and I'm sure people in the audience, children do. You may even have some young folk here or savvy types that buy online. It's not the way that things are going, and to develop a plan based on the premise of retailing providing your activity and your liveliness is frankly absurd. The third point I'd make, the third elephant in the room that hasn't been taken into account, is the issue of context. There is no context. These proposed guidelines are context-free. They fail to acknowledge, comprehend, or comprehend the existing place, and consequently fail to plan for Midland's unique sense of place. There's no mention, as Mr. Irwin, the architect, commented on, there's no mention of Central Midlands Gold Rush period architecture. If you're developing guidelines...
Yeah, 1 minute, Mr. Smith.
If you're developing guidelines, there's a need to follow the methodology that was provided to town planners by Patrick Geddes, basically 100 years ago. And the Patrick Geddes guidelines is survey, analysis and plan. This is a plan that's context-free. There hasn't been any survey, there hasn't been any analysis. You've grabbed the plan from the bottom of the drawer, turned it into Midland and presented it to you as a document. I would argue that this design guidelines should be thrown out, or the design guidelines should have their name changed from Midland Activity Centre Design Guidelines to Midland Strategic Regional Centre, which is Midland supposed to be, Midland Strategic Regional Centre Design Guidelines for the destruction of Heritage Midland.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Councillor, I'll ask you to keep your questions short, and Mr. Smith, you can answer them briefly because we still have a lot to get through tonight.
I'll do my best.
Councillor Richardson. Councillor Scanlon.
Just one very quick question, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Smith, I just wanted to ask you about the global warming and the urban heat effect in Midland, which is obviously an issue for us. I'm wondering, the 10 degrees increase that you mentioned, can we find a reference to that through Dr. Helen Brown's work, or where can we find a reference to that?
Well, I've done my own research on that with a heat gun in the city of Perth, and 10 degrees hotter, the pavement, where it's in the full sun. 30 degrees day, 30 degrees under the shade of a plane tree, cream-coloured bricks, 40 degrees in the sun, cream-coloured bricks, and the fascinating thing, it was 50 degrees with synthetic grass. But there's been lots of research done on urban heat island effect. The Helen Brown report specifically talked about increased deaths. And
thank you, Mr. Smith, and I'm sure that Councillor Scanlon will get all that research off you if she so wishes. Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Kiley.
Through you, Mayor. Greg, do you believe that this plan, if it goes ahead, we need to look at more public open space to counter the heat island effect?
I think he made that obvious in his presentation, Councillor Coley. So I think you've answered that question already. A further question?
Well, the plan is to increase the development. There's been, and if you've got Morrison Road, the development along there will eliminate huge amounts of open space, private open space, and the loss of trees. It's as clear as the nose on your face that this plan is a plan to increase the urban heat island effect, and sort of, although good, some rooftop gardens, they're not going to ameliorate the overall impact.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, just a quick question, Mr. Mayor. So how can we redevelop Midland while retaining its heritage buildings and avoiding the heat island effect?
Well, I would say you've got to start off with a proper survey and analysis, a survey of what's important in Midland, an analysis of why it's important and the opportunities for redevelopment. Sensitive redevelopment should be the cornerstone of good, sensitive, sustainable planning. Sustainable planning is supposed to tick the box of environment, social and economic. This only seems to be interested in the issue of economics and fails. I'd give it a 0 out of 10 for social and a 0 out of 10 for environmental.
Thank you, Mr Smith. Further questions, councillors? Thank you, Mr Smith.
Thank you.
Next is item 1.7 is the Midland Oval Redevelopment Urban Design Guidelines, and Mr Irwin. You have 5 minutes, Mr Irwin.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Some of you may know already my opinion of the plan on which these guidelines are premised, but let me just reiterate the statistics in case you don't already know. The actual green open space, green public open space in the suburb of Midland is currently 1.31%, and I'm using the figures provided by your planning department with corrections, but I'm maintaining the 60% residential expectation. We're going from a current 1.31% with the plan for the MORM, which basically removes our only green heart, the only real green space we have, will leave us in the suburb with 0.61%, including the 60% correction figure. Now that is 0.6% compared to recommended 10%. Referring back to Greg's very good point about urban heat sink, that is a diabolical figure to consider. For Central Midland, which is the wedge defined by Professor Stevenson in 1977 in his report, the wedge of land between Great Eastern Highway, Morrison Road and Lloyd Street, that has a higher percentage of parks. It's currently got 6.47%, mainly because it's a smaller area. And it's the original subdivision, by the way. That's the area of the original subdivision of which Midland Oval was created in 1891. That will reduce to 2.51% for that original wedge. That wedge includes Carnegie Gardens, Juniper Gardens, so we've got a couple of other tiny parks. Now, Council must be aware of these figures because the decisions you are facing and taking, the direction you're taking this town, you will leave us with no effective green open space. You have to face up to the realities here. This isn't just sentiment about the heritage values of Midland Oval and the Velodrome, although that's important. It's reality. This is, like Greg says, people can be dying of this sort of impact. Now, if I could just refer to the report itself, there's a diagram showing an undercroft, two-storey undercroft, roughly following the profile of the existing Midland Oval. And this is labelled public open space. A two-storey undercroft under a podium, presumably for a shopping centre, we don't know, we're not told, and that's labelled public open space. It's like something a sadistic kindergarten child would come up with. It's an appalling concept. We're all keeping straight faces here, aren't we? No one's laughing. It's not actually funny. But there it is. And these guidelines contain that section. Check it out if you don't believe me. Two-storey podium labelled public open space. Two-storey basement labelled public open space. This is not good enough. This whole guideline for section 1, this to which I'm speaking, is permeated on an appallingly
1 minute, Mr.
stupid plan that has no potential of doing any good to anyone. It won't succeed financially, it won't succeed environmentally, and it won't succeed socially. It destroys the heart of the town, the oval, which has been there longer than the town itself. So to quibble about the actual guidelines in the context of the plan on which they're based seems fairly futile, so I really have to refer to the plan itself. And I've given Council a plan which retains Midland Oval and the Velodrome and gives you all the development that your MORM plan shows. And yet that was presented at a special meeting of electors and was subsequently rejected by Council. I would ask you to perhaps go back and look at it again. Look
Thank you,
something
Mr.
like that.
That's your 5 minutes. Questions,
Okay.
councillors? No questions. Thank you, Mr. Irwin. Now takes us to item 3.1, the proposed amendment number 178 of Local Planning Scheme number 17 to rezone lot 811 number 6 Tipper Court, Hazelmere from general industrial to special use to facilitate commercial retail hub, and Mr. Mike Davis from Element, the applicant, to speak against the recommendation. Mr. Davis. You have 5 minutes, Mr. Davis.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, councillors and executive staff. I'm making a deputation in relation on behalf of my client, being the landowner of lot 811 Tipper Court in Hazelmere. I'm speaking generally against the officer's preferred recommendation and instead would support the council passing a resolution which delegates the ability for the city's officers to initiate the scheme amendment request, subject to satisfactory retail sustainability assessment being provided that demonstrates that the proposal will not have a detrimental impact on the sustainability or viability of existing commercial centres within the trade catchment area. By way of background, this scheme amendment was initially lodged with the City on the 15th of March 2019, nearly 12 months ago. This initial proposal was supported by a comprehensive economic report prepared by economists Praxis, which provided a benchmark assessment of Hazelmere against other comparative industrial centres and found that Hazelmere is severely lacking in service-oriented and convenience-based uses for Hazelmere's growing employment population. Subsequent to this initial scheme amendment request, the City completed its internal review and requested that a retail sustainability assessment be prepared to support the proposal. In response to this request, we provided further independent expert advice from Praxis, which concluded that a retail sustainability assessment is not warranted in this instance for the following reasons. Firstly, the state's activity centres policy seeks to maintain a viable hierarchy of activity centres and was developed specifically in relation to retail and commercial activity centres that are oriented towards servicing residential population catchments. The policy does not consider industrial centres or the need to provide convenience services for these important employment centres. The need for amenity in industrial areas is supported and encouraged by the state's economic and employment land strategy, which is the current overarching state-level strategic planning document for industrial areas in the Perth metropolitan area, and is perhaps more relevant in relation to this proposal than the state's activity centres policy. Praxis formed the view that the proposal should therefore be viewed as part of an existing industrial employment centre and should not be assessed as an out-of-centre development as defined by the state's activity centres policy. We understand the need to maintain the retail activity centre hierarchy, but having said this, we are confident that any retail sustainability assessment will show that there is a negligible effect arising from this proposal on surrounding retail centres. Praxis, as the appointed economic consultant, also advised that the development of an RSA is an expensive option and is not considered necessary in this instance. This view was formed despite their potential financial benefit in having to prepare one. We also understand the importance of protecting strategic industrial land for the future due to its limited supply in the Perth metropolitan area. However, this site is unique within the Hazelmere Enterprise area in that it is it's a much smaller lot than the prevailing lot sizes within the area, partly due to the previous land take associated with the future Lloyd Street, and is not really suitable to accommodate large transport logistics-based uses intended for this part of Hazelmere. The site is also afforded frontage to 3 roads, including the future Lloyd Street extension and Bushmead Road, and is therefore well positioned to provide convenience services to passing traffic on this prominent corner site. We provided this additional justification to the City staff in response to the initial request for the retail sustainability assessment. We were of the understanding that the City was reasonably comfortable with the justification, and we subsequently submitted a revised scheme amendment report in August 2019. The current recommendation to defer this item subject to providing an RSA comes some 6 months after providing additional justification. While we believe an RSA is not required in this instance, in order to move this proposal forward, my client would be willing to prepare an RSA to allow the City to progress this amendment request. Given the significant delays in the City progressing this proposal, my client respectfully requests that the Council pass the following alternative resolution. That the Council resolves to initiate the scheme amendment request as proposed, subject to the City being provided with a retail sustainability assessment prepared to the satisfaction of the City, which demonstrates that the proposed quantum of land uses would not detrimentally impact the viability of established activity centres within the trade catchment. That basically forms the crux of my submission, and I welcome any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, councillors? Okay. No questions, Mr. Bennett. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Councillor Johnson, your question to staff.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I'm just interested in the planning staff's views on this potential alternative motion to initiate, subject to the City receiving an RSA, I guess, from Element. I've got a microphone here, Councillor.
Mr. Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Highly unorthodox and, with respect, impractical and unworkable. I don't believe that you can have a motion that is equivocal in whether or not, under the Planning and Development Act, as to whether or not the council has amended or resolved to amend its scheme. It can't delegate that based on a subjective view exercised, I imagine, by me through the CEO, as to whether or not the RSA supports or doesn't support an amendment to allow this level of retail floor space. The alternative motions, in effect, would be, and we've tried to do something to allow the applicant to address the issue at hand, which, respectfully, the applicant hasn't to date. The alternative could be that the council simply refuses to initiate the amendment at this time, and then the applicant can go away and prepare the requisite information and resubmit, because there is no law that says you may only submit a request for a scheme amendment once, Mr. Mayor. So that's one possibility. But the question arises, how would the applicant feel, having paid for all of the work to produce this RSA, if I exercise my own impression that no, it was no good, and let me tell you something, I'm actually busily working on material in relation to a SAT reconsideration of retail, and let me say, Mr. Mayor, it is a very murky world, retail sustainability assessment, very, very murky. So the applicant, I don't think, would really want to contemplate a situation where I've formed my own view that no, this isn't good enough. You're not having your amendment initiated. Invariably, the applicant would want the decision to come back to the council. So for all of those reasons, Mr. Mayor, it's a novel but largely an impractical and, in fact, I would say effectively unlawful resolution around trying to sub-delegate a decision that the Act simply doesn't provide for.
Further question?
It's a follow-up. So I think, therefore, Mr. Russell, or another way of looking at this would be there's plenty of this convenience store and service station on Lloyd Street is only likely to be sustainable after the bridge has been built and we've got a lot of traffic running through. So therefore there is plenty of time for the applicant to go away and resubmit with an RSA. Is that a reasonable approach?
Mr. Russell?
Through Mr. Mayor, there may well be. I've heard the applicant say they're prepared to do it. There is ultimately no time frame set in the legislation around the lodgement of a request to amend the scheme. It's not like a development application or a structure plan where there is a certain time frame. The good customer service would say that where the applicant has made a fee payment to the city, they have a right to have a report prepared to this council. So it's not for mine a question of time, it's more that they've made a request. We've formed the view that the documentation is not sufficient to address the strategic issues at hand, and rather than say we refuse it, we've given the opportunity for, effectively the council isn't resolving or the recommendation of the council is not resolving that it resolves to initiate this amendment. Instead of saying we're not going to initiate it, it's an opportunity to say, well, we're going to defer the decision to allow you to go away and provide more information that may, in the end, address the concerns the staff have that might be able to place in front of your recommendation for support, although that's not guaranteed. So it's not a question of timing, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Russell. Councillor Parry.
Just a very quick question to staff, Mr Mayor. How much does an RSA cost to work through?
Mr Russell.
Probably about 15 grand, 20 grand. I'm looking at a court case where there's about 10 different RSAs submitted, and that ran into the millions, I'm told, by the proponent.
Thank you, Mr Russell. No further questions, councillors. We'll move on to item 3.2, which is the local development plan of Morrison Road West, and Ms Francesca Irwin speaking against the recommendation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. With reference to 3.2 local development plan Morrison Road West, please. Myself and our family live behind this development area on Harper Street. We've been there 20 years. We plan to be there indefinitely. I speak as a resident and as a member of Midland Society that seeks to enhance the living space of Midland for all users. This report, again, 3.2 local development plan Morrison Road West, it's predicated upon and condones the construction of a 4-lane highway on Morrison Road, also known as Highway 1 between Great Eastern Highway intersection at the entrance to Midland and joining up with the 4-lane highway further along. It's approximately 700 metres of a 4-lane construction biting into the existing space and houses on south side of Morrison Road. The implications of this 4-lane highway are such that the council is recommending and encouraging site amalgamation along this strip, i.e. high-density 6-storey construction, and preventing vehicular access to Morrison Road West by those living on the road. This will lead to destruction of the existing single-house residential character and pattern on both sides of the street. The 4-lane highway cuts across the residential area. Many residents are elderly, retired, and some are young with families. All will be threatened by a 4-lane highway, preventing access to shops, schools, etc. Morrison Road is already dangerous enough to cross at the top of Poynton Avenue. It's already a dangerous place to try and cross. Well, let's look back at how we got to this situation. Morrison Road West has become pedestrian unfriendly as a result of it becoming Highway Number 1 approximately 30 years ago, with the closure of Great Northern Highway through Midland. That decision virtually killed off Old Midland Town from a retail perspective and as a functioning town centre. Ever since, the community has been trying to protect what's left and encourage the council to revive its flagging heritage identity. We appreciate that anticipated growth in residential accommodation targets drive the city's forward planning. The risk is that the city overlooks the critical need for this increased population having access to humane urban lifestyle, such as trees, roads you can cross, a sense of place that recognises and honours heritage and future living. All this is possible. Look at other councils, Fremantle, Vincent, Subiaco, who deliver on this obligation. Successful regeneration is evident on traditional high streets in Leederville, Maylands, Freo, Basildine, where they have retained and redeveloped the heritage properties as appropriate retail and service outlets. Let's look at how decisions can provide a better future for all. The example I'm referring to is in Guildford, 20 years ago, when James Street from Johnson Street to the river was proposed to be turned into a 4-lane highway. Fortunately, it was not, as a consideration for the unique heritage value of the bridge restricted such a development. Now look at the value of Guildford, how proud you are of it, the bustling and attractive shopper and tourist-friendly high street returning its rateable value. Compare what would have happened had the council not had the foresight to consider the alternative vision of a 4-lane highway bang through the middle. Same situation faces you in Midland. Yes, the city needs to grow, but will it grow into a soulless bastion of concrete jungles, high-density blocks, urban heat islands that imprison residents and cut them off from community and infrastructure? Or will its guidelines and forward planning predicate an expectation for urban living growth that encourages healthy community? I'm sure you are already aware of the stats on the cost of city ghettos to council and ratepayers. In closing, I urge you to ask your council officers to reconsider the 3.2 Local Development Plan Morrison Road West, and in particular to change its paradigm on access and use. We observe Midland has our major transport routes. Lloyd Street will soon become completed through to Abernethy Road, and Midland is ringed by bypasses, Roe Highway and Great Eastern and Reed. We don't need another stretch of 4-lane highway. The issue of traffic calming is best achieved by single-lane streets well shaded by trees and surrounded by activity. This will encourage creative residential infill that satisfies your growth targets and also supports residential ratepayers, supports long-term health, viability and vitality of the area, returning rateable value. This also ensures your legacy as a council that embraced Midland living into the future, not maximised short-term returns on soulless urban ghetto living. Yet again, the councillors have an opportunity to consider their voting on Midland issues, what it says about your priorities, foresight and fair go mentality. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Irwin. Questions, councillors? Councillor Kiley.
Through you, Mayor, just to staff in respect of...
Hang on. Are there any questions of Ms Irwin? Okay, thank you, Ms Irwin.
Thank you.
Councillor Kiley.
The approval of the Lloyd Street Bridge, the progression of that, does that have any bearing on this coming before council?
Mr Coaten. Mr Vanderlyn.
Mr Mayor, with regards to Morrison Road and the local development plan and how it relates to Morrison Road itself, the local development plan is not the instrument that identifies Morrison Road as a 4-lane road to be dealt in future. That has been identified many years ago. Definitely since 2008, Morrison Road widening has been shown in our town planning scheme. So it's zoned as such, and it's been in place at least from that point in time. The bridge on Lloyd Street will obviously accommodate or generate more traffic or different traffic volumes and flows into the area. But modelling has shown that Morrison Road in future will have to be a dual road. The local development plan, all that is doing is trying to give it an indication of how to deal with the fact that it is going to be a dual carriage road, and when a developer comes along to make him aware of it and how to deal with it in his development. It's not the mechanism. We're not now saying that the road needs to be widened. That's been a decision that's been made long ago.
Thank you, Mr Vanderlyn. Councillor Carlano.
Oh yeah, thanks. On that same sort of track. So that was council that identified that as for 4 lanes. It wasn't like a main roads thing or state government identification for Morrison Road to be 4 lanes.
Mr Vanderlyn.
It is. The road planning is done at that higher level. It's done in conjunction with main roads. So their roads impact on these major local roads. So it's work that's done in conjunction with each other.
Okay, and just when was the last time that kind of idea to widen Morrison Road, when was that last reviewed in line with all the other traffic changes that have gone on in Midland?
The latest modelling, they're currently doing that for the Metronet developments relating to with the Midland station.
When was that?
So they're currently doing new
They're doing it now, and prior to that?
And prior to that, as part of our transport strategy of the city, which I think was adopted by council in 2016, there was modelling done for the whole of the Greater Midland area, which was adopted as part of the transport strategy. I think it was 2016.
Mr Tan, you wanted to add a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's important to note, right, this plan talks about if landowners, right, you got more than a dozen lots fronting Morrison Road. If they want to develop, they can lodge an individual plan with individual access coming off Morrison Road. This one is only trying to demonstrate, right, restricted access off Morrison Road, amalgamate some of the blocks for development potential with single access on the restricting the number of access on the Morrison Road. In terms of traffic and traffic management, it's a better outcome. What we're saying is you put that as a guide, and any developer looks at that would know I can't have direct access onto Morrison Road because of the traffic concern. They have to look at alternative. If you don't have something like this, right, every individual block can apply for a development with single access onto Morrison Road.
Thank you, Mr Ted. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I've heard that we've got a plan for this, which we've had since 2008. We've got traffic modelling. The question is, why does it need to be a 4-lane highway when currently 2 lanes seems to be sufficient? I've never seen a traffic jam on it. Anyone else on that one?
Mr Van der Linde, perhaps?
Mr. Mayor, the modelling and the engineers will know better, but the modelling works on the volume of traffic expected to use that road in future and the function of the road. So within that road reserve, you have to accommodate the vehicular traffic, cycle paths, pedestrian paths. So and you have to also incorporate tree planting to shade the area. Now, if you consider all those aspects together, you need a certain road reserve width to fit it all in, and it is that road reserve width that requires the widening. How you configure the actual construction of the road will still be determined, but at this stage the traffic volume certainly identifies the need for 2 lanes in each direction in the longer term.
Thank you, Mr.
Follow-up. Did the traffic modelling take into account the existence of the Lloyd Street bridge, the new Lloyd Street?
The latest modelling that was done, which I think was 2016, considered the Lloyd Street connection. It also considered the fact that we may lose the access of Roe Highway and Morrison Road interchange. And it also considered all the upgrades to the roads in the area that we were aware of at the time.
Thank you. Councillor Parry.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Question through staff. If you refer to page 305, basically shows just a bit of clarification, of course. It says that looks like the lot boundary after road widening is split in between 2 of Poignant Ave, compared to page 128 of the same agenda that basically says the whole thing is going to be demolished. Is that map correct in 305? Because it looks like it should be it should be lot boundary after road widening all the way through.
Mr Van der Linde.
So 128 to 305.
Okay, so the road widening along Morrison Road is along the total length of Morrison Road, all along it on the southern side. And if you look at the plan on page 305, the road widening extends all along there as well. It is just shown for those properties that's been identified to be amalgamated. It's clearer, but you'll see on the southern side it goes through, and I take your point that for those 2 sites that it's not shown on the northern side of Poynton Road, those 2 sites actually already have access. So they've got access. If you look at the plan, they need to take access of Poynton Road and William Street. So they do not have access on Morrison Road, but the widening goes through those properties as well.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Carolina.
So then leads us on to the question of Byers Road, handling all that traffic, if those lots are amalgamated. Because that's actually effectively a cul-de-sac, Byers Road. So how does that traffic then disperse down Byers Road? Because you basically, those three big lots then all have to basically disperse down Byers Road towards William Street, and then to get onto Morrison Road again, they've got to go onto Poynton Avenue and turn left onto Morrison Road, because you can't go down William Street and turn left. So I just don't know how have you done some traffic modelling on how this would work in terms of those residential streets?
The detail of the internal precinct has not been modelled, but the principle is that those properties take access of those internal access roads. Those access roads is intersection. So Poynton Road's intersection with Morrison Road, and William Street intersection with Morrison Road. Well, through the construction and upgrade of Morrison Road, those intersections will be upgraded so that it can take that additional traffic that will be generated through the new development. So it's specifically you direct the traffic to where you can accommodate it, and that's at those intersections where you plan for it.
Okay, but that's actually got to first flow down Byers Road, and then it's got to then turn left at Byers Road to either go down Poynton Avenue or down to William Street.
That's
so
right.
There's actually a couple of turns and all kinds of things that has that been taken into account and modelled?
The principle is the traffic at the end of Byers Road will travel the whole distance of Byers Road, but the properties closer to the intersection of William won't travel on the rest of Byers Road, because they don't need that. It's a cul-de-sac. They only use the first quarter of it to get out. So there's enough space for all that traffic on that road.
That's
all
the present,
traffic
present
in
situation.
Byers Road doesn't travel past every point in Byers Road.
All the traffic in Byers Road doesn't. No, but all these traffic from these blocks will. Those three blocks that have been outlined in the plan here, they will all
those
travel
at the end will, yes.
down the full extent of Byers Road, and then they'll have to deal with an intersection. And I just wondered whether that modelling, that traffic modelling, had been done for that particular residential area.
No, it hasn't. But the detail of that traffic movements will be looked at when there's a development application submitted for those specific lots.
Which could be 20 years away.
Thank you for that.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, I'd just like to draw Council's attention to page 305, if you're not looking at it already. The junction of Morrison Road and Byers Road, there is a single triangular lot in that location, and it appears that the lot boundary after road widening cuts right through that lot, and there is a heritage building. It may not be on the list or the inventory, but it's certainly a heritage building on that lot. What will become of that building if this goes ahead?
It is correct that corner lot is impacted by the road proposals. I'm not 100% sure about the heritage classification of that building. To the best of my knowledge, it's not on the council's heritage list. And if that is the case, that building specifically could be lost through upgrades of the roads.
Councillor Scanlon, you're next.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My question is regarding to a comment that Mr Vanderlyn made in answering Councillor Catalano about an internal precinct. Were you meaning the internal precinct design of that block, or what did you mean by it?
What I meant by that is, if you look at the outline of the development, the local development plan, as a precinct. So on page, if you look at page 305, the blue inlined area would be that precinct that is subject to the local development plan.
Mr Tan, you want to add a comment to that?
I just want to draw attention to councillors. On page 304, right, it's very clear the objectives of the local development plan. It talks about access restriction. All this traffic modelling on Morrison Road is part and parcel of the whole Midland strategic centre, which main roads will do the modelling in terms of the future access road and freeway. I believe there's going to be a briefing sometime in the future on that. This is purely right to demonstrate, to advertise to the public, if you want to develop on these lots, these are the access restriction. The objectives are stated there quite clear, 5 dot points.
Thank you, Mr Tan. Councillor Coley, you had a question?
Just a quick one, Mayor. Do main roads take into account heritage buildings when they have a desire to make something a 4-lane freeway? Is that in there? Is that factored into their consideration?
Yes, if those are heritage buildings, they have to factor it in, and I think a good example of that is Main Road's recent work along Guildford Road into the city, where widening wasn't possible as a result of certain heritage buildings.
Okay. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Scanlon, you got another one?
Thank you. I just need further clarification on my previous question. The internal precinct, does that mean that the layout of those lots, all those properties, could be changed completely?
Mr Vanderlyn?
Within the precinct, which is the subject of the local development plan, we expect redevelopment to take place. When redevelopment takes place, it can take place in various ways. It depends on the market, who owns the land, so on. So that could be smaller developments on individual lots. It could be street blocks that gets amalgamated, or it could be 2 lots that's amalgamated. Depending on what the final outcome of that is, will determine how the precinct changes in terms of its subdivision and design.
Thank you, Mr Vanderlyn. Thank you, councillors. No more questions. That takes us on now to 3.5, which is a change of use of shed to ancillary dwelling and associated works at lot 56, number 107 Lakeview Drive, Gidgegunnup, and Ms Muriella Bennett, the owner, speaking against the recommendation in support of the application.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, councillors and staff for the opportunity to present my deputation. I am the co-owner of lot 56, 107 Lakeview Drive, along with my husband Alan Bennett, who is a gold card Vietnam veteran. He has many health issues and suffers from post-traumatic stress, and this whole process has taken a whole lot out of him. So he sends his apologies he can't be here tonight. We purchased Lakeview Drive in 2000 from Colleen and Maureen Ty, and it included the shed complete with bathroom, kitchen, industrial air conditioning, pot-belly stove, septic tank and a 20,000-gallon water tank. I spoke to Kerry Ann from the Shire on the 6th of August and she emailed a copy of the building licence plan and this is all she could find. It does show the kitchen in the back, but it doesn't say kitchen, and it does show the septic tank. In 2003, the property was sold round the corner in Waterford Drive, and we rang the Shire to inform them that we wanted to live in our shed house. They did not advise us of any problem with doing so. We proceeded to make it more comfortable for ourselves and our then teenage children. We have 4 daughters. As we built in the building boom, we were unsure how long it would take to build our new home. We moved into the shed in August 2003. Our house was completed just under 12 months later, and we moved in July 2004. At no stage was our shed house decommissioned. And we thought that this might have been because it was an ancillary dwelling. In 2014, our youngest daughter's marriage, and this is Melissa here, came to a sad end, and she and her 3 children, then aged 5, 3 and 13 months, were left without a home. With no financial support from her ex-husband, she could not afford to rent, and we had perfectly suitable accommodation on our property. Melissa was and still is working at Coles Mundaring doing night fill to make ends meet. She had to purchase complete furniture as the ancillary dwelling was not furnished, and this also put a great amount of financial stress on her. During this difficult time and now, for her and her children, living on our property has enabled us to support her so that she can work at night, and also it gave the children stability and security. The older two children have been particularly traumatised from the separation, and living close to us have made them feel very safe. During the past 5.5 years that Melissa and the children have lived there, she has made it into a comfortable home with many renovations, which she's worked very hard for, such as a new kitchen, updated bathroom and floor coverings. All of the building works have been carried out by professional tradesmen, and we can provide a report from an accredited builder. We were advised by City of Swan that the dwelling was not approved, so we began the process of having it approved retrospectively mid-August 2019. All along the way, from the very first time I went down to the Shire offices, I was led to believe that approval was possible, even though it may be conditional. I had one officer actually say to me, because it had been built prior to the 2015 changes, that she couldn't see a problem. We also obtained a BAL report which gave us the worst fire rating possible. However, they believed a reduced BAL of 29 was still available. We arranged for the Shire to have the property inspected by the FCO Mark Smith, as we thought we could have a controlled burn before fire restrictions. Because the report was so bad, we thought, my goodness, we better do something. We have a 3-metre fire break around the full perimeter of the block. All our fire breaks meet the required standards, as well as a driveway that runs through the centre of the property that leads to the main house. There is also a 5-metre driveway around 3 sides of the shed/ancillary
Yeah, 1 minute,
dwelling.
Ms Bennett.
Pardon?
You have 1 minute.
Oh. Mark Smith, the FCO, came and had a look, and I spoke to him on Saturday, and he said I could quote him, upon his inspection, the fuel loading in that area to the road and surrounding was not high and could be delayed. I have copies of emails from Jonathan Lendich, planning officer, who says, I've received comments from the City Fire Team who outlined, with the information supplied, including the architect's measurements, the required setback of BAL 29 is 21 metres, and they believe the additional metre can be found if the neighbour's tree is not right on the fence line. After I submitted the BAL, he wrote back, 2 senior officers have assessed this application and find a BAL 29 rating is achievable by clearing a vegetation setback within the lot. Now, the problem arises on the west side with our neighbour. She has 4 trees on that property that are, the base is 1 metre away from the fence, and the major vegetation at the front is that Flinders Range wattle, which is, I've discovered, is a weed and needs to be eradicated. And so over the years, because of all these wattles that have grown up, her fire break is no longer along the fence. I have a letter from my neighbour complete with photographs from her property where she states 1 tree needs to come down because it's dead, another one has white ants. The remaining vegetation towards the front boundary is mainly self-seeded wattles. See attached photographs. I'm happy to remove these as it would allow me to reinstate the original fire break on my side of the fence.
Thank you, Ms Bennett.
Okay.
Questions, councillors? Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, question, Mr Mayor. So if the changes proposed by the applicant were made, would that sufficiently change the bushfire attack level to make this potentially approvable?
Mr Russell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As I understand, the principal problem that we have is to get the BAL 29 rating is going to require clearing on the adjoining neighbour's property, lot 55. The guidelines indicate, obviously, that you need to provide your asset protection within your lot. I'm not clear from the applicant here whether what's being suggested is that her neighbour is willing to clear their property such that the vegetation that gives rise to the BAL rating to her property might be reduced from its to the step below BAL 40 to BAL 29. I'm happy to hear anything from the applicant as to whether or not she's got arrangements or can produce arrangements with the neighbour to that effect, but in the absence of that, what remains is a BAL rating of BAL 40, and the documents say fire zone or Bell 40 are not recommended except under some exceptional circumstances which the report identifies that this application regretfully does not meet.
Thank you, Mr Russell. Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Mayor. A question of staff. I'm a bit confused
hang on a
about
sec.
the pre-existing use.
No one got any more questions of Ms Bennett? You got a question, Ms Bennett?
Just a quick question, ma'am. Have you discussed this issue with your next neighbour? And
Yes,
he or
I've
she
got a
indicated?
letter signed by her
Okay.
with photographs showing the dead tree and the wattle vegetation.
Okay. So
She's very happy to do that because it would decrease the fire problem on her side.
Okay. Councillor Johnson, your question is Ms Bennett?
I guess the first question is your neighbour prepared to give us that in writing? And I guess the next other question I have is how long has the shed been there and for how long has it been a home?
It was built in 1994 and it became a home for a year in 2003 to 2004 and then 5 years ago when my daughter moved in. One thing I wanted to add is that the boundary, the shed, if you have a look on the plan that's supplied in your report, the shed is actually not parallel with the fence. So it's 20 metres, so we're 1 metre short at the back end. It's 20.6 at the front end, so we're 40 centimetres short at the front. The veranda does not go all the way to the end of the shed. That gives us another 3.5 metres, which is a total of 24.6.
Any further questions of Ms Bennett, councillors? Thank you, Ms Bennett. Councillor Henderson, you got a question of staff.
I think Mr Russell got it in regard to the pre-existing use before the bell came in.
Mr Russell?
Sorry, Mr Mayor, didn't quite catch that.
Ms Russell, it appears as though there was a pre-existing use of this building for the residential purpose. How is that not applied? Because if it was a pre-existing use before the bell, that's what I'm effectively asking. Has that been overridden by the bell laws?
Well, there's no pre-existing approval to use the shed for ancillary dwelling in conjunction with an existing single house. Now, what I've understood from what the applicant is suggesting is that they, unless I misheard it, there might have been some use of a shed back in the day as a temporary arrangement to live in. That is very different to this application, which is for ancillary dwelling in addition to the single house, not an interim arrangement prior to occupying the single house. So they're not one and the same things in effect. So there's no prior lawful use for the shed for ancillary accommodation, or as we might call it, a granny flat or something else. So there wasn't a prior lawful use of this building for this purpose before the fire regulations come in. So the fire regulations apply to this application in 2019-20 for ancillary dwelling.
Thank you, Mr Russell.
Another question, if I may. I'm a little confused. So you're saying that they effectively lived in the building illegally?
Mr Russell.
Not quite, Mr Mayor. Back in the day, and some of my colleagues here will appreciate this, the city had a facility whereby it would allow for the temporary occupation of a shed as a residence, as an interim arrangement to the construction on site of a house, and that was here in place when I started in 2003. Went along for a number of years, and then it was done away with for various reasons I won't go into here. But that arrangement effectively said you can live for a temporary period, something like 2 years of the lifespan of a building permit, while you're in a shed, subject to certain criteria inclusive of adequate effluent disposal and potable water and the like to make it livable. You can live in that for a couple of years while you're building a new house. By the time you've built your new house, you move out of your shed, you're not living in your shed anymore, you're in your main dwelling. That's not a policy that's operational anymore for various reasons, as I said, so that's the distinction. It wasn't the case that the applicants here were living unlawfully in their shed. I have no doubt that they were living entirely lawfully under the terms of the instrument we had in place at that time for that purpose, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Russell. Councillor Coley.
Through you, Mayor. Option 2, to approve it talks about Australian Standard 3959 under the implications. Would that be to increase the cladding of a fire, particular fire rating? What does 3959 refer to?
Mr Russell?
Yes, Councillor Coley is correct. That is the Australian standard in relation to construction measures for bushfire risk mitigation. So there's a raft of things there. That level to get to the BAL 29 or to actually have the standards of construction to address what is a BAL 40 rating is pretty much top level.
Thank you.
And again, would it be staff's opinion that that would be a possible... I haven't attended the building. Is it possible to achieve that on the current building?
Mr Russell?
I can't answer that. Mr Mayor, I've seen the current building in town. I'm not a building surveyor or qualified or certified builder.
Thank you. Further questions? Councillor Parry.
Just a quick question, staff, Mr. Mayor. Can staff please provide a report if all the conditions given to Mr. Tan in regards to the if all the clearing has been completed to council, so we can give a recommendation and go from there. That's okay.
I think I understand your intent, but Mr Russell?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I'm happy to speak with the applicant privately later on. What I would suggest that she needs to do is to conjoin her neighbour to the development application and sign the requisite forms, provide a plan that indicates the area of clearing, have that certified by their fire consultant, and then we can issue an approval that goes across the two pieces of land, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. No further questions, councillors. We'll move on to the next item, which is 3.6, the proposed reception centre at lot 2979, number 102 Hammersley Road, Caversham, and the first speaker is Ms Alison Cunded, on behalf of the Swan Valley Tourist Alliance, speaking against the recommendation.
Good evening, Mayor, councillors and staff. I would first like to point out that we have emailed to all councillors earlier today a more detailed deputation for you to consider before the February meeting, and this evening I'll be highlighting some key points from that document. The Swan Valley Tourism Alliance supports the Swan Valley Planning Committee's decision to refuse the above application, as the proposed reception centre is inconsistent with the planning objectives for Area B as listed in the Swan Valley Planning Act 1995, specifically clauses 8.6 and 8.7. We also consider that this application manifestly fails to meet any one of the four current LPS 17 objectives for the Swan Valley Rural Zone of section 4.2.23. The Swan Valley Tourism Alliance wishes to respectfully make the following points. This development does not provide quality infrastructure or investment in the valley with just a car park, temporary marquees and portaloos. The proponent expects to hold events on Fridays, Saturdays and Sundays. Therefore, the marquees would need to be erected by Thursday. We suspect that it is not cost effective for a marquee or marquees to be dismantled for 2 days and then re-erected for the following weekend. This would make it more than a temporary structure and more like a semi-permanent one. This proposal on Hammersley Road does not include any rural, agricultural or viticultural components. This is purely a standalone. Mulberry-on-Swan has been cited as an example of an existing standalone reception centre. Council should note that this business was established long before the Swan Valley Planning Act was in place and therefore not relevant to the proposal. Riverbank Estate was also quoted as being a reception centre, but this is actually also a winery and a restaurant and grows viticulture. So that ticks every box that we need in the valley. It is well known that the location on the river floodplain has excellent soils and is suitable for growing a variety of crops. Riverbank Estate grows extensive viticulture on the floodplain, as do several properties around the corner on Maxwell Road. We note that in the planner's report there was nothing from DPIRD on what the type of soil was, or were they even consulted. Councillors, if you could look at your planning documents, which should have a photo of the easements on the property. The easement, or the Dampier-Bunbury gas pipeline, has been suggested as being an impediment to growing viticulture. There are several properties that have this easement with viable viticulture grown on them. For example, Sandford Wines, Ambrook Wines, the Kadich and Loretta families. Property owners have the choice of planting over the easement or beside it. I think if you look to the north of the property in question, you can see the easement actually going over two properties that have viticulture on them. The Swan Valley Tourism Alliance welcomes the development of the Swan Valley, provided that the proponents contribute to the Swan Valley ambience by establishing a commercial horticultural or viticultural component as part of their development, the scale of which should be no less than 1 hectare and not just cashing in on the existing Swan Valley opportunity without contributing to its rural ambience. City planners ought to be aware that viticulture must be valued for more than its productive capability and should be a prerequisite for any potential development. Viticulture is vital in order to continue the potential of the valley and its future. Approving standalone developments on vacant land without imposing conditions to plant will see vines continue to be removed. This is exactly what Amendment 176 is designed to redress. The days when the word tourism could get almost anything in the Swan Valley was meant to be long gone. The notion that any development can be labelled tourism is not keeping up with modern tourism trends. There are many types of tourism, such as wine tourism, agri-tourism or cultural tourism. This development fails to meet any of these.
1 minute, Ms Cunded.
Thank you. Therefore, it may be beneficial for the City of Swan to review and refine its application of the word tourism in relation to the Swan Valley planning issues and in order to prevent its use in standalone development applications. In conclusion, the SVTA see this as a standalone development that should be refused in its current form and supports the Swan Valley Planning Committee recommendation to refuse. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Cunded. Questions, councillors? No questions. Thank you, Ms Cunded. Councillor Henderson, you've got a staff question.
Thank you. This would be from Finance. Ms Lay, if this were approved, would this property then be rated commercial?
Through you, Mr Mayor, if the primary purpose of using that land is of a commercial nature, then it would be.
Thank you. Councillor Kiley.
The proposed driveway, Mayor, I'm interested to know if there's a dust issue, people driving down there, is it proposed to be sealed?
Mr Russell, limestone, isn't it?
Through you, Mr Mayor, gets down to the vexed question, what sealed is this? By sealed, you mean bitumenised or bitumenised concrete? No, I believe it's just compacted road surface or limestone. But of course, the standard of any sealing to car park or access areas is open to the council to consider and determine, if it wishes, as any conditions of any approval of this application.
Thank you, Mr Russell. Councillor Anderson.
Another question. I don't see any limits on hours of operations. Is there some consideration for this?
Mr Russell.
There can be, Mr Mayor.
Can be. Okay. No more. Thank you. The next speaker on the same item is Mr John Burgess from the Burgess Design Group, seeking support of the recommendation.
Thank you, and good evening, Mr Mayor and councillors. I'm also here with my client, Francois Kutza, who will be available to answer any questions you may have, particularly in relation to the business itself. I'd like to thank the planning officers for their time in assessing and reporting on the application. The report is comprehensive and we support the officers' recommendation for approval. The purpose of my deputation is to provide and comment on some elements of the proposal and, as I say, also to be here to answer some questions. I think there may be some confusion in relation to the interpretation of the productive rural use of land and other land uses, such as our proposed reception centre within the Swan Valley. The Swan Valley Planning Review report does make some statements around securing land for productive rural uses within the valley. It even states, for example, a new restaurant or reception centre without a direct connection to the land will be prohibited. The direct connection being planting of vines or some form of agriculture. This was simply a recommendation of the review. The Minister then released the Swan Valley Action Plan in October last year, outlining plans for a new Swan Valley Planning Bill to define rural character and give some further land use guidance, a new Swan Valley Planning Scheme, which will formalise zoning and land use permissibility, the creation of an independent Swan Valley Planning Authority, which will be a subcommittee to the WAPC, and the creation of a strategic leadership group to champion the Swan Valley. Given a release of the Swan Valley Action Plan, these elements will no doubt be progressed. However, there is currently no statutory status for the recommendations contained therein. The City initiated its own Amendment number 176, and the previous speaker referred to this, to reflect some of the intent of the review and introduce some hybrid land uses. The amendment changes permissibility to 5 land use classes, now requiring some form of intensive agriculture or winery use to be associated with them. Those were food and beverage production, place of worship, restaurant and tavern, with roadhouse being prohibited outright. Amendment 176 does not change the permissibility of reception centre, which remains an A use. There is thus no statutory basis to suggest that this use cannot be supported in the absence of some form of primary production on the land. Councillors, we prepare our applications based on, and they're assessed, based on the prevailing planning framework. That's all we can do, and that is what currently applies to the land. Equally importantly, the City also has a policy, POL E9.2, floodplain management and development, which specifically states under 3 flood management, uses which are not permitted within a floodway except where public works associated with flood mitigation are, any intensive agriculture, e.g. orchards, vineyards, that will impede flood flow. The policy specifically restricts development of any vines on this land, given the majority of the site, including all of the subject area where the proposed reception centre will be, is located within the floodway. The other thing I'd like to comment on is the temporary nature of the structures. There's been some commentary around that this evening. In case you had any doubt, I'd like to reassure councillors that this development involves only the temporary use of structures and facilities on site for specific occasions. There is no intention to erect a marquee and associated facilities and leave them there permanently. The marquees are expensive, they're well maintained and very well presented structures. For some venues, for instance, when these activities are occurring on places like the South Perth foreshore, they spend about $500 per night for security to protect them.
1 minute, Mr. Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The proposed location is 400 metres from the existing house on the property. There is no easy surveillance of the area and it's situated right next door to the river. It would be a risky thing to do to leave these structures up in the longer term. The marquees require cleaning and can be damaged or soiled by ongoing exposure to the elements, and also they are used for other venues and occasions elsewhere. It is not our client's interest to leave them permanently on site, nor is this what is proposed. In summary, the site is located in a relatively remote location. It is located on the southern edge of the Swan Valley and not within its core area. It's situated between 2 existing permanent reception centre venues. No permanent structures are proposed. No submissions were received during advertising. There were no objections from technical agencies, including the Swan River Trust, and the City's officers have no objection with regard to either traffic or noise. We consider there's little or no impact on prevailing rural character or amenity.
Thank you, Mr. Burgess. That's your 5. Any questions, councillors? Councillor Henderson, you're first.
Thank you. Mr. Burgess, some discussion has been had about Limestone Road and dust problems. Would the applicant consider recycled asphalt as an example, which is obviously much lower dust? It's fairly solid, but it's not like a permanent hard asphalt, if you like, to keep the dust issues under control?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, we will be guided by further discussions with the cities and officers on that issue. Our intention was really to provide something that was going to be low-key and created as a little impact on the existing environment as possible, which is why we didn't want to be putting bitumen and hard surface.
Thank you.
Councillor Scanlon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Burgess, I'd just like to know how the development application complies with the Swan Valley Planning Act clauses 8.6 and 8.7 with rural character.
I'll try and be brief as I can, Councillor. That's a very detailed question, which I would need to refer to each element. So There's no permanent structures being proposed on the sites. There's no permanent buildings. The location is, as I've mentioned in my discussion, at the very southern end of the Swan Valley Protection Act area. Effectively, we consider that this is activating or repurposing a site that really has very limited other potential. The site is located so that the venue is a minimum of 400 metres away from any other dwellings, so it's remote, and it's sheltered by some existing vegetation as well. I can tell you that my client, Francois, actually put a lot of time and energy into looking for a particular site that suited this need. It's to service people who would like to have this kind of activity, like a wedding venue in a marquee, that don't have access to a rural property like maybe a friend in the Swan Valley, but they don't want to go to a more formal centre like Mulberry Farm. They want to have that rural style opportunity. So this is something that is unique within the valley. So because of the lack of permanent structures, etc., we don't believe it has any impact on rural character. The traffic is minimal. The report puts a ceiling on the number of patrons that can attend. In terms of, we believe it's a tourism use and supports tourism use within the valley, so it will draw people into the valley. It's highly likely to draw people into the valley for events that will then want to stay in the valley, and the officer's report has made some commentary around that and the flow-on potential economic effects. The valley, other elements of the Act include subdivision. Well, it's not relevant to subdivision. Mr Mayor, I could run through each one individually. I'm not sure if I've answered Councillor Scanlon's question enough as yet. But
yeah, I imagine you could be there for a while.
Yeah.
Councillor Richardson, you've got a question.
Yes, thanks. I've just got a couple of questions. These marquees, are they hired or owned by the owner?
Thank you, Mr Mayor and councillors. Thanks for the question. Yeah, so everything will be owned by us.
And how many do you own currently?
Look, we probably have an excess of about 1,200 square metres of it. So
Sorry?
1,200 square metres. So for an event of this size, of what we're sort of proposing, you probably need about 300 square metres.
Yeah, but how many do you actually own of those? Sorry.
Look, you build them in sections, so they come in 3 metre sections. So it's it's hard to tell you. They don't come in individual sort of sizes, so it's sections that you build. Do you follow?
What's the proposed on a nightly basis for a function? Then how many would you have up at one point?
Look, 2 or 3 on a weekend is what we sort of aim to do as a business.
And what's the timing for being able to construct one of these? How long does it take to construct one prior to the event?
Yeah, look, it takes between. It depends on the. We sort of. Our aim is towards the top end of the wedding market. So it's quite an expensive sort of exercise to start off with. These are not the cheap weddings. So even comparing us to having a wedding there to the existing venues in the Swan Valley, we would be more expensive. So
I'm just wondering what the timing is. So if you've got a wedding on a Saturday, Sunday, or that day, how long would you need to construct this prior to?
Yeah, sure. So look, it depends on the detail of what the bride's going for, but we take a minimum of 1 day, 1 full day, and it can take up to 2 days.
1 to 2, and then to deconstruct as well.
Say again, sorry?
To deconstruct as well is another 2 days. So
no, the deconstruction only takes 1 day.
1 day.
Yep, much quicker.
So you're looking at roughly like a 3-day process every time there's going to be an event. And what's your forecasted vision for how many events you're planning to have during the year?
We would hope to get 50 in a year, but I mean, if we get 30, that we would be we would be happy.
So this would be quite a few weekends during the year then that the neighbours could be disrupted by. You've got the crew coming to construct, deconstruct. You've got wedding guests coming. There's quite a bit of traffic.
Look, it's a couple of trucks are driving down the driveway and parking up for the rest of the day. So it's
what kind of trucks have you got coming? What size?
Look, we've got a 9-ton truck and some 3-ton trucks. So you'd have 2 or 3 trucks sort of coming and going during the day. So it's not hundreds and
But you've got equipment then as well to come in, high gear as well, so that's extra vehicle movements.
No, we own everything except for the toilets. So everything will come by our own trucks.
But that's on top of the marquee trucks, is what I'm saying. You've got quite.
Yeah. Look, that's right. So the literally the top end of the market, the biggest ones or with the most amount of detail in them, you're sort of talking about 10 truckloads in total.
And is that early morning setup and then early morning
Look, it depends, but yeah, it's sort of you try and obviously work when it's a bit cooler. So 7 o'clock in the morning start normally.
Is that allowed on Saturday morning?
Just
Just a quick question to start. What's the
Hang on
starting
a sec,
time
let's
for?
finish with the questions to these guys.
No,
first.
what's the total that you would expect from that event in terms of people and vehicle movements on? Have you got a Cat 300?
Yes, we had a traffic impact assessment done on that.
Maximum 300.
I
is
don't
it?
have it right in front of me, unless John's got it.
Don't have the traffic, but we've got 75 bays.
300 visitors, 30 staff.
And we've got 105 parking bays, of which we've got, I think it was 70, let's find that page, are allocated to visitors because we expect that most would come in by ride share or taxis for this kind of event. And then there's staff parking as well.
Okay.
Councillor Henderson, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Just to expand on operating hours, set up, of course, is one thing, but the actual event operating hours, what would be the start and finish time that you'd be looking for within your application? And in particular, I'm looking at Sundays and perhaps Mondays or public holidays finishing times, because there are some rules around noise on that.
Yep. So basically, weddings, because it's in a in a rural property, look, we would be guided by council on that as well. But normally it would be sort of the music would be turned down by 10, and the people would need to have left the property by 11. And the function probably starts off at about 5:30 because of the earlier finishing time. There.
Thank you. And in regard to noise, obviously amplification is used just about everywhere these days. Will all of the amplification be inside the structures, or would there be any amplification outside?
Look at it depends. People do tend to have music outside as well. Look, the structure doesn't stop a lot of noise in itself. So we've actually, the plan is, we've got, there's a sound system available that's from Germany, and it's quite effective in dropping the actual noise over a certain distance. So they're talking about 51 decibels drop of the bass of the music, which is the thing that causes the trouble. 51 decibels over 192 meters, and I think we've got about 400 or 500 meters from the nearest dwelling on the property.
Just to be clear, at 192 metres, the sound pressure level will be 71 dB, 51 dB.
No, it drops the sound
drops
51
by.
decibels.
So to be clear, if you're producing 110,
yep.
you'll be well over the allowed rule.
Yeah, look, weddings is you wouldn't be producing that sort of sound at a wedding. And look, it will be limited to make sure that we don't go over the thresholds. As sort of required by the Environmental Protection for the Noise Act.
Thank you, Mayor. Perhaps that needs to be identified and detailed. Thank you.
Councillor Lucas, you're next.
Thank you. Could you just clarify, when you said the amount of events, was it 15 or 50, 50?
So 50.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Richards, you got another question?
Just last question. Have you actually spoken to the presiding residents about your proposal?
With who, sorry?
Have you spoken to the residents on that stretch?
There was advertising, so this has been advertised. There was no objections received.
Okay.
Thank you. Now, Councillor Richards, I think you had a question to staff. No? No more questions, councillors? Thank you. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, councillors.
Can now move on to item 3.8, which is proposed shopping centre, medical centre, supermarket, pharmacy and cafe at lot 9215 Penarge Way, Brabham. And we have Mr Robert Nichevich speaking in support of the recommendation.
Yeah, good evening, Mr Mayor, councillors, officers. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm the proponent of the project, and I'd like to commend the council officers for their work. And I'm pleased and grateful for the officers' support, and I'm here to support their recommendation. Having seen this agenda item, the residents, and there were some 288 that responded to the advertising in favour of this proposal. They're excited that finally they're going to get some services, and they don't have to go for 5 kilometres to get a loaf of bread or a bottle of milk. I trust that the council, when it considers this next Friday, will approve and support the recommendation of their officers. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions, councillors? Thank you, Mr Niktovic, and it'll be next Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Item 3.9, change of use not listed, crematorium to lot 104, number 166, Berengara Avenue, Malaga. We have Ms Stevens or Ms Helen Cochrane speaking against the recommendation. Okay, and neither of them there? Okay. In that case, we'll move to Mr Glenn McLeod from Glenn McLeod Legal on behalf of the Metropolitan Cemeteries Board, speaking against the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, councillors. As you said, I represent the Metropolitan Cemeteries Board, and it opposes this application on 3 primary grounds. First, as a use not listed, the proposal must be consistent with the objectives of the general industry zone, and it fails that test comprehensively. Secondly, the operators have stated that they will rely on funeral directors and hospitals to transport bodies to the crematorium. Funeral directors must be licensed by the Metropolitan Cemeteries Board. It is unlikely that funeral directors will be licensed to take bodies to the proposed facility. Thirdly, it is not possible practicably to operate a crematorium as claimed by the proponents. Firstly, in regard to the clause 4.2 of the City's Local Planning Scheme number 17, uses not listed must meet the objectives of the zone. The objectives of the general industry zone are as follows. In summary, the use must provide for a range of generally larger scale industrial development, including manufacturing, servicing, storage and distribution. Secondly, the use must ensure development within the zone is complementary to development in other zones. And there's a third one relating to advertising, which I'm not talking to. And the fourth one, the use must ensure environmental performance of industry does not detract from the amenity of adjacent sensitive areas and conforms with the relevant environmental standards. In regard to the first one, the proposed use cannot be properly characterised as a larger scale industrial development, which includes manufacturing, servicing, storage and distribution. I don't think I need to elaborate on that. Secondly, in regard to whether or not the use is complementary to development in other zones, crematoriums in Perth are located in special use zones or reserves. As noted by the Department of Local Government, Sport and Cultural Industries in its submission opposing this proposal, there are risks associated with the location of a private crematorium anywhere. Permitting a use that commercialises the handling of dead human bodies in the general industry zone exposes adjoining landowners to the risks associated with the transport, handling and cremation of deceased humans and any operational failure associated with this. A private crematorium cannot therefore be said to complement other zones. The proposal therefore fails to comply with Objective B of the General Industry Zone. In regard to Objective D, the applicant focuses solely on the impact of odour on the amenity of adjoining sensitive areas. We reiterate our client's position in our written submissions that it is difficult to say conclusively the impact of odour will be minimal without the support of a sufficient environmental assessment which specifically relates to that site, and we don't have that information. Also, the impact of the amenity goes further than odour.
1 minute, Mr McLeod.
It affects the social surrounds, and that is also addressed in the submissions. The hours of operation don't add up because the proponent says that it will dispose of 10 to 12 bodies per day from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. It takes 90 minutes approximately to dispose of a body. If you do the maths, you won't be able to dispose of those bodies in that time. The proposed development is therefore inconsistent with the objectives of the general industry zone. It is incompatible with adjoining land uses and the locality more generally, and it is otherwise unviable and impractical. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr McLeod. Questions, councillors? Councillor Henderson.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm interested to know why you think it's unlikely that they would be licensed to take bodies to that place.
Because the licensing is provided for under the Cemeteries Act and is the responsibility of the Cemeteries Board.
So just to be clear, Cemeteries Board are in the business of doing that, so that's effectively a competing business, is it?
It's not. The Cemeteries Board is not a business. It is a public service provided for statutorily. So it's not really appropriate to call it a business.
It operates services though.
Yes, that's correct. So it operates the service. The stated intention of the this proponent, as you would have probably seen in its paperwork, is to have a commercial operation that competes with the Cemeteries Board.
Thank you. Councillor McNamara.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr McLeod, you represent the Metropolitan Cemeteries Board, and just as Councillor Henderson just asked a question with regard to licensing, are you the licensing body from the point of view of the Metropolitan Cemeteries?
Not of the crematorium, but of the where the licensing body of the funeral directors, and this proposal says that it will depend upon the supply of bodies, as it were. They will be transported to the site by funeral directors.
So my following question through you, Mr Mayor, is that you will not, or your company that you represent, we call it a company because it's a business. You just said it's a business.
No, I didn't say it's a business. I said it provides a public service.
You said it wasn't a business then?
No, I didn't say that. It's in competition. The business is the commercial operator, the proponent here, who will be, as Councillor Henderson said, in competition.
I don't want to get involved in a debate with you, Mr McLeod, because I get censored because of debate. So the issue is that if you're in competition with somebody, then you must be in a business to be in competition with them. Am I correct?
Well, anyway, it's semantics. What is the substance of the question?
I'm asking you a question, Mr Mayor, if that's all right with you.
Yeah.
Right. The following question is that you're saying that this is a commercial use, that they want to start the business of cremating corpses and dead people.
Well, they say that in their proposal. Yeah.
So that's what they say. And you're saying it because it's a commercial use, you're against it. But yet you license funeral undertakers to carry corpses from point A to point B elsewhere. Why is there a conflict in your issuing of the licenses for this particular commercial use than the commercial use of a regular funeral undertaker?
Yeah, well, I understand the question. Thank you. The reason is that the funeral directors convey the coffins to cemeteries, the Metropolitan Cemetery Board cemeteries or rural cemeteries, which are expert in dealing with those matters. That is the disposal of bodies. So the point of my... Sorry, does that answer your question?
Not really, Mr. McLeod. My question is, what is the difference, through you, Mr. Mayor, what is the difference of issuing a licence to a funeral undertaker who carries a dead person from point A to point B, just because you don't agree with this particular development because you mentioned it, you consider it to be a commercial use?
No, well, it's the destination. It's not just that it's commercial. The point about this application, as I've highlighted in my presentation, is that there are a whole lot of unanswered questions about it. So, you know, it's about the destination of the body, as it were, as opposed to the fact that it's commercial.
All right, Mr. Thank you, Mr. McLeod.
Okay.
Thank you.
Further questions, councillors?
Yes, I have my hand up.
Councillor Congredon, yes.
Thank you very much. Mr. McLeod, can you tell me, are there any other crematoriums in the metropolitan area other than those associated with Pinaroo or are they any more in industrial estates or?
Not of which I'm aware, yeah.
Councillor Richardson?
Thank you. Just wondering, can you just provide a bit more information about why this particular facility provides capacity up to store up to 150 bodies as opposed to other?
Yes.
I think that would be a question to the applicant, wouldn't it?
Sorry.
That would be a more appropriate question to the applicant.
I can comment on that, but I understand that is in the paperwork, the proposal, 150. That is one of the anomalies that we don't understand because I think, and it is a question you could perhaps ask of the proponent, just what backlog of bodies do they expect? Because you're led to believe in the proposal that you won't have a large backlog, as it were, that there'll be a continual process of disposing of the bodies on almost a daily basis. But when you look at the time it takes to dispose of a body and the numbers they say they can dispose of between 8 and 5, it doesn't add up. They won't be able to dispose of those bodies in that time, so one assumes that they'll be backlogging the bodies in that large storage facility, which I understand was not originally built, purpose-built for a crematorium.
Thanks, Mr. McLeod. I think that is an appropriate question. Councillor Richardson, you can hold to the applicant. Councillor Kiley, you're next.
Can I ask any questions?
Mr. McLeod, two questions. The Metropolitan Cemeteries Board, who is it made up of? Is it the industry representatives or other undertakers representative undertakers? And secondly, how do they make their money? How does the Metropolitan Cemeteries Board make its money?
Okay. Well, Councillor, we're dealing with a planning application, and those two questions are totally inappropriate to the planning application for a crematorium in Malaga.
I just
so
would
I'm
like to
having a
understand,
great deal of difficulty relating the two.
I'd like to understand on what basis Mr. McLeod is coming before us and who is he speaking on behalf of, because I don't understand.
Well, he's a lawyer speaking on behalf of the Metropolitan Cemeteries Board.
Well, who is the Metropolitan Cemeteries Board? Let's put it that way. Who are they?
Shall I answer that?
If you can give a quick answer who they are.
A quick answer. It's a statutory board set up under the Cemeteries Act. It has a number of board members. They represent all of the major religions. And I think there is, I can't be certain about this, but I think there is a representative of the funeral directors on the board. One.
Okay. Councillor Johnson, you had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, my question is this. I think what you're saying, Mr. McLeod, is that while this council has the power to approve the building of a crematorium, what you're saying is that your client, the Metropolitan Cemeteries Board, has a further licensing capability and can deny the use of this building as a crematorium. Is that right?
Well, it's a question that hasn't been addressed in the application and is vague because the Cemeteries Board is unlikely to approve of undertakers taking bodies to that facility on the information currently available to it. It is a separate issue that it will come up before the Cemeteries Board in due course, but the information simply isn't there. So I'm pointing to something that's lacking here, something that doesn't make sense.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. McLeod.
Thank you.
Okay, now that brings us to the next speaker, and it's Tayan Evershed from Planning Solutions speaking in support of the recommendation. Thank you, Mr. Evershed. You have 5 minutes.
Good evening, Mayor and Councillors. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to make this deputation. Firstly, we support the officer's recommendation, which is to approve the proposed change of use. From the outset, I'd like to make it clear to you that this application is not for a funeral parlour, and therefore there will be no services held on site. Put simply, the premises will discreetly receive bodies which are to be cremated. What's being proposed here is essentially an activity or a process that converts the 6 key elements of oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, calcium, phosphorus that make up the majority of the human body and converts them to ash with no odour. The process I've described is no different to any other activity that you would commonly find in a general industrial area. And so from a town planning perspective, there will be no amenity impacts in terms of traffic or odour, meaning the use is entirely appropriate within the general industrial zone. We've provided a statement from the manufacturer of the crematorium unit, who has almost 40 years' experience in the industry and installed over 110 units Australia-wide. This statement confirms that there will be no detectable odour, soot or smoke created from the process. And whilst I understand there's some concerns from nearby businesses regarding this issue, the manufacturer has confirmed this process will ameliorate these emissions. I also understand that there's been some concerns addressed around the perceived impact that the use will have on the amenity of the area, given it deals with the bodies of the deceased. However, the only amenity impacts the application, the only amenity impacts of the application that are relevant to Council's consideration this evening and next week are those that relate to town planning matters that arise from the use. And as I've stated, there is no traffic, there is no odour, there will not be amenity issues from a town planning perspective. Now, references have also been made to other legislation such as the Cemeteries Act and the Cremation Act. These are distractions. You're not being asked to make a decision under the Cemeteries Act or the Cremation Act. You're being asked to make a planning decision under the City of Swans Town Planning Scheme number 17. Ultimately, if you consider this application objectively and on its merits, approval should be granted. Councillors, I don't propose to take up any more of your time. In conclusion, the proposal will not create any amenity impacts from a town planning perspective, and it's entirely appropriate use within the general industrial zone. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Councillor McNamara, you're first.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Evershed. Do you need, or does your business need, a licence from the Metropolitan Board to actually conduct this particular type of business?
As I've said, the application that's before you is for a planning application. It's not uncommon that land uses and proposed activities require other approvals from other agencies. If it requires an approval, then we'll seek one. If it doesn't, we won't.
The question is, now, are you aware that you need a licence, or are you aware that you do not need a licence? I mean, the question assumes that this is your business and you should know about your business. So that's all I want to know.
That might be a question for the owner who comes up next.
Yeah, so the proponent follows me next. I guess I would reiterate that we're seeking planning approval for the land use under the City of Swans Town Planning Scheme. We're not seeking a licence approval under some sort of other act in this jurisdiction.
You can re-ask the The applicant comes next. Yep. Councillor Kiley, a planning question.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. Planning question.
Planner.
I note that the proposed site is probably within less than a kilometre, probably a kilometre from the Orchard Avenue precinct of Bennett Springs. I was wondered if anybody there were consulted, or but then again, you say it has no emissions and no smell, so I'm probably preempting your answer there.
I guess I'd defer to the officers to advise on how far they consulted.
Could I ask that of officers now?
We'll deal with Mr Evershed first. Any further questions of Mr Evershed? Thank you, Mr Evershed.
Thank you.
I can ask that question, Councillor Kiley. Mr Russell. I wouldn't have thought so.
Thanks for your indulgence, Mr Mayor. So the question of Councillor Kiley was the extent of consultation. Okay, the extent of consultation was direct notification to property owners within 200 metre radius of this property, and then a sign on site inviting any interested parties to make comment. What you will note from the report is that there is a submission by way of an attached petition of a number of up to 80 or so property owners that have made a submission of objection. So it's evident that if I can use that expression, Mr Mayor, the word has got out, and a broader area of the community beyond 200 metres perhaps has had the opportunity, whether being alerted by the sign on site or by word of mouth as the parlance goes, they've had the opportunity to make a submission and have their voice considered, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Russell.
And a follow-on, Mayor. Phil, do you know if anybody from Bennett Springs has put in an objection?
Through Mr Mayor, no, I haven't got the petition in front of me, but my initial review of it was that they were mostly Malaga residents or proprietors.
Businesses, yep. Okay. Any further questions, councillors? Thank you. We move on to the next speaker, which in fact Mr Bren Glover from Cremations Australia Incorporated, speaking in support of the recommendation. And Mr Glover, you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, councillors, executive. I wonder, in light of the questions that have been asked already, Mr Mayor, if I could indulge the councillors with some additional photos that will probably better answer some of the questions that have been asked already.
Yes, pass them around.
Cremations Australia is aware that several objections were submitted to the City of Swan with regards to establishing a crematorium at the proposed location. All submissions were valid concerns from business owners, tenants and landlords suddenly being confronted by one of life's rarely discussed practices. It's a procedure that most of us don't want to think about or have never been exposed to, unless you've personally organised or attended a funeral service of a loved one. Although valid objections, they're misconceived simply due to the fact that very few people have actually seen a crematorium in operation or have ever been aware that they were standing just a few metres from a body being cremated. If you have ever attended a funeral service in one of the chapels at Fremantle, Karrakatta or Pinaroo, then it is almost guaranteed that you stood within metres of a cremation in progress. And I'd now ask if you could just refer to some of the pictures in your notes there. You can come to understand exactly how close the crematorium units are in each of these locations in terms of location to public access, cafes and the chapels themselves. You'll notice that the distances range from as small as 8 metres up to 40 metres from the chapels, cafes and public assembly areas. The vast majority of people in attendance at a funeral would have absolutely no idea that a cremation is occurring at that very time, just metres from where they are standing or sitting. And I'm certainly aware that everybody in this room has had the unfortunate occasion to attend a funeral at one or more of these locations. And I implore you to think back to that time, to whether you notice any smoke or any offensive smells, and I will guarantee that you didn't. Odour and emissions. Cleanburn Australia, a division of R&Y Engineering, have manufactured, as Mr Evers said earlier, over 110 cremation units which have been utilised on the east coast of Australia since 1982, making it the largest supplier of cremation units in Australia. The cremator furnace exceeds the Clean Air Act for emissions and odour, a standard adopted by the state health planning regulations for combustion not exceeding 3 gigajoules per hour. Since 1982, they have received 2 complaints from local councils, nearby residents and or commercial tenancies with regards to offensive emissions and or odours. In both instances, it was attributed to new operator error, not following operating instructions. Operators were retrained and no further incidents have been reported. Odour and emissions will not be detectable by adjacent businesses. I'd just like to clarify that. In the 28-year history of Cleanburn's manufacture, hundreds of thousands of cremations have occurred with their units, and 2 complaints have ever been filed, and they were operator error. Parking. The crematorium will not hold funeral services, nor will it be accessible by the general public. Ashes will be delivered by Cremation Australia to the client's funeral home or to an address nominated by the client. Only cremation staff vehicles, service vehicles and approved funeral home vehicles will have access to the site. Parking and or traffic will not be impacted. Body storage. The proposed commercial site had a pre-existing storage fridge installed prior to Cremations Australia Incorporated viewing the tenancy. Although it has large storage capacity, Cremations Australia determines it will not require for storage for more than 10 bodies at any one point in time. This is comparable to Bellray Mortuaries, located at 24 Mulgle Road in Malaga, and Perth Cremations at 2 Carson Road, Malaga. And also I'd like to highlight the fact that InvoCare's new operations centre at 23 Truganina Road, Malaga, stores on average 40 bodies on site at any point in time. The number of bodies stored by Cremations Australia will not be in excess of any of those currently stored at neighbouring Malaga sites. Another objection that was mentioned pertained to bodies being wheeled through the car park. Transfer vehicles delivering bodies for cremation will reverse into the building through a roller door set 16 metres back from Berengara Avenue. All transfers will take place within the building with the roller door lowered. All bodies will be delivered in a sealed coffin and remain in that coffin until cremated to ash.
1 minute left, please.
Okay. I'd finally like to discuss the position that Cremations Australia finds itself in Western Australia as compared to the other states. And if you have a look in your notes there, price comparison between the states, you can see the results of a survey looking at the different cost of a cremation in every other state and territory in the country. And you'll notice that Western Australia, which is completely government owned or it's MCB controlled, they have got a monopoly in Perth on the cremation activity. You can see we are certainly at the higher end of the national costing. And if you look at South Australia and Queensland, where both the government organisation as well as private organisations do work in competition, as was a word bandied before, then the costs there are significantly lower. We see the average cost for a funeral for a family in Perth dropping by over $400, by over $800 as a result of us coming into the market and offering a more competitive service to the bereaved.
Mr Glover. That is your time.
Thank you.
Okay, I think you're up for a number of questions. Councillors, Councillor McNamara, you're first.
Yes, again, it's Mr Glover.
Yes.
Mr Glover, I'll ask you the same question. Do you need a license to conduct your business in Malaga at this particular premises?
our approval will ultimately come from the Governor. Okay, the Governor of Western Australia will be the one to grant us our licence, okay, in conjunction with the Chief Health Officer. The Chief Health Officer has already given us approval. The Governor's approval is dependent on our approval from the City of Swan.
But is the Metropolitan Cemetery Board part of that governing body?
Okay.
And has the Governor a position on that board?
The Metropolitan Cemeteries Board has zero jurisdiction over cremations outside of their own operations.
Thank you, Mr.
And you had one other question before, which I know wasn't answered properly, pertaining to funeral directors, whether they would need approval to come and deal with their bodies with us. Now, the answer to that question is no. The Metropolitan Cemeteries Board provides approval to funeral operators who use Metropolitan Cemeteries Board property, i.e. if you are using one of the major cemeteries in Perth, you must be approved, and you are a funeral operator, you must be approved by them to do that. However, I guess the similarity is if you look at a place like, say, Bunbury, where Metropolitan Cemeteries Board do not have any jurisdiction over their cemetery down there. It's actually run by the Bunbury City Council. Funeral operators do not require any approval whatsoever to become funeral operators.
Thank you, Mr. Glover.
Thank you. Councillor Congerton.
Thank you. And could you please tell me, do you have a constitution currently available?
We do, yes.
Is that publicly up to public viewing?
It has not been made public at this point in time, no.
Can it be made public?
It can be made public? Certainly.
Councillor Catalano.
I was just interested about the 70 bodies in one place in Malaga and the other place had bodies. Sorry, I just missed, how did the bodies actually get there and then where do they go after the Malaga?
Yeah, so Tim, so in Malaga you've got, currently you have 2 funeral homes. Okay, so if a person dies in a hospital or a nursing home, the body is typically transported directly to that funeral home at that point in time, where they are stored in a cool room.
Oh, like a funeral director?
A funeral director, yes. Yeah. So there are two funeral directors and 1 mortuary service. Yeah.
Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Kiley.
How do you intend, through you, Mayor, how do you intend to get around the approval to transport bodies to the site?
No approval will be required to transport bodies to the site. It was a red herring that was thrown up before. No approval is required from the MCB.
Questions, councillors? Okay, thank you, Mr. Glover.
Thank you very much.
Okay, councillors, we're now on to item 13.12, proposed extension of time for the term of the approval lunch bar at lot 400, number 107 Clayton Street, Bellevue, and a warehouse at lot 510, lot 109 Clayton Street, Bellevue, and Mr. Mark Richardson, Mark Richards, President of the Bellevue, President of the Bellevue Ratepayers Association, speaking against the recommendation. Thank you, Mr. Richards.
Good evening, Mayor, councillors and staff. As the Mayor pointed out, my name's Mark Richards and I'm representing the Bellevue Residents and Ratepayers Association here this evening. The Bellevue Residents and Ratepayers Association opposes this approval on the ground it contravenes the Bellis policy. Now, I don't know how many times we've brought up Bellis, but are you all familiar with Bellis? I've actually printed off some copies of Precinct 6. Unfortunately, I haven't got enough copies for everyone, but you can look up Precinct 6 as part of the Bellevue land use study. It's actually a document on the City of Swan site. These DAs, as I've pointed out, are in Precinct 6, and the future zoning of this land is residential development. Less than 100 metres away, also on Clayton Street, a large tract of land has already been zoned urban by the WAPC. We apologise for not lodging a submission, but I was away in Melbourne at the time. The DA also proposes a warehouse with no details of what what is proposed to be stored there, which is a concern, especially being owned by Henderson Petroleum Proprietary Limited. The Omex Petroleum site next to this lot is one of the worst contaminated sites in Western Australia. The Omex site has had a cost in excess of $6.9 million to clean up. We are continually astounded that we need to be the gatekeepers of Bellis, a policy that was adopted by Council back in 2013, whose recommendations are slowly progressing. Bellis is a plan which maps the future of the suburb and eventually will eliminate conflict of land use of residential and industrial and upgrade the suburb in many ways. We are urging councillors to reiterate to officers to refer to Bellis when considering recommendations and to refuse this application for extension. There is no mention of the Bellevue East Land Use Study policy in the officer's report. The Bellevue East Land Use Study was an expensive exercise for the city and part of the compensation for Bellevue for selling public open space of Goodchild Oval, and developed after a long community consultation. Council must refuse these DAs on the ground it conflicts with Bellevue East Land Use Study, which was adopted by Council in 2013. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr Richards. Any questions, councillors? 1, 2, 3. Surprise. Councillor, we'll start with Councillor Scanlon, you're first.
Thank you for your presentation, Mr Richards. I'd just like to ask you to clarify again exactly how this conflicts with the Bellis study.
Well, one of the, I think it's for, the lunch bar is actually zoned residential. One of the main points with this area of land was trying to stop industrial encroaching, and it's been earmarked as residential. And the future of this area is in accordance with Bellis of actually making it residential. So it goes against everything in this consultation in all the money that we've actually spent doing the Bellis.
Thank you.
Councillor Johnson, you're next.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's a question to staff, actually, so I guess...
Okay, hang on. Councillor Kiley.
Through you, Mayor. Mark, the $6.9 million clean-up, is that been spent or is due to be
I think it's well in excess. I've heard rumours that...
but have they spent that money?
Yes, they've already spent that, yes.
And which site is that one? To the west or east?
It's...
closer to us or further away?
Yeah, closer to Midland from that site. So it's basically lot 401 if you look.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions of Mr Richards? No. Thank you, Mr Richards. Councillor Johnson, you've got a question to start.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Question for the planning staff. I just would like to understand what planning status the Bellevue Land Use Study has when determining this application.
Mr Russell.
Like just about most things, Mr Mayor, the principle is of due regard. But what I will say here, and it's important to note in the report, this is for the proposed extension to the term of an existing approved development, and the report is at pains to outline the tribunal's test as to the matters to be considered. And you will note it doesn't consider, it's not required to reconsider a matter previously considered unless something substantial has changed. Now, at this point in time, nothing has changed with Bellis that wasn't previously considered under the original approval. So the framework for assessment set by the SAT it's not a case of saying if we don't like the development now because we think, or someone is suggesting it's inconsistent with Bellis. That was a matter that would have been considered originally. Whether it was considered originally or otherwise, you've got an existing approval. You're not reintroducing a new issue about retrospectively going back and reconsidering whether it was consistent with it. Because, as I said, the framework is there's 4 key tests in law that the council is to have due regard to, and it doesn't include instruments that had previously been considered at the time of the initial approval unless those instruments have changed. Now, my understanding is there's been no revision of BALAS or a new BALAS document with different provisions since the time of the original approval. So to answer the question in a roundabout way, whether or not this is consistent with BALAS is not the right question set out under the SAT to be answering in this extension to the term of an existing approval.
Thank you, Mr Russell. Further questions? Councillor Keller.
Following on from that, though, when you are considering an extension of time, isn't that a good opportunity to then review whether everything was taken into consideration when it was originally approved? Because otherwise, what are you considering? I mean, you know, there's got to be things to consider in making that consideration about the extension and whether it's still a valid whether the approval is still worth extending. You see what I mean?
Mr Russell.
I'll read directly from the report, Mr Mayor, and I go to page 499 and element 4 of the Tribunal's test by none other than His Honour Judge Parry. Has the planning framework changed substantially since the development approval was granted? And so then the supplementary one is 5. Is the development likely to receive approval now? So what you're doing is looking at the instruments. Okay, has BALAS changed substantially, or is there some other instrument that's come into operation and effect since the time of the original decision? And so, as I said, so the answer to that, as I understand it, is no. So it's not a case of going back. It doesn't say, for example, a reappraisal of the development application against the instruments previously considered against. If it said that, then the answer to Councillor Catalano's question would be yes. But it doesn't, so the answer must be no, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Russell. Councillor Cole, you have a question?
Through you, Mayor, would the announcement of a train station going in the area be a significant enough change?
Mr Russell.
Well, that's a hypothetical, Mr Mayor. If the answer to that is yes, the planning framework has changed, for example, because the state put an alignment of a train line through the subject site, then the answer to Councillor Kelly's question would be yes.
Thank you. Councillor Catalano.
But going back to point 4 on 499, it doesn't say there that it was actually approved with consideration to the BALAS policy. So why is that? Because that BALAS policy was in existence when this was approved. Correct?
Mr Russell.
Well, it's correct that the report under 4 doesn't list BALAS. That's correct.
Councillor Zini.
Therefore, sorry, to follow on, so therefore was it assessed in accordance with the BALAS policy?
Mr Russell.
I'll take that on notice, Mr Mayor, and what I'll do is I'll go back and look at the previous approvals and see whether they are items presented to council, items done under delegation, and see what they referenced. But let me just say this: it wouldn't make any difference whether they were or whether they weren't, because at the time in which they were assessed, if BALAS was there and BALAS hasn't changed since then it's not going to meet the test of fulfilling Part 4.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. With regard to whether there have been any changes to the planning framework, while the City of Swan has not made any changes to its planning framework, in addition to the new train alignment, there's a major new housing development subdivision to the south in Mundaring. So although it's in Mundaring's shire, is that a relevant consideration?
Mr Russell.
Well, the question would have to be, what significance is that? I mean, you could say, for example, has the planning... Well, let me rephrase that. The term has the planning framework changed. It's got to be the relevant planning framework. Certainly in Western Australia, there's been numerous changes to the planning framework since the time of the original approvals. But they're irrelevant because those changes have no material bearing on the application. So in answer to Councillor Johnson's question, I would have to understand, and you'd have to make a case that some change in Mundaring had a material impact relevant to this application. And on the face of it, I'd be struggling in the first instance to see what those might be, but I'm open to hear a case for it.
Thank you, Mr Russell. I agree with you. Councillor Scanlon.
Thank you. Again, a question on planning to Mr Russell. My question is regarding the information contained on page 496, and it talks about the previous approval of lot 400. All these approvals are under delegated authority. So does that mean that lot 400 has never actually come to council for any of these approvals? They're all done under delegated authority, and this is the first time that's coming to council.
Through Mr Mayor, if the representation in the report, and I've no reason to doubt it, as we can all read, it all says in both, certainly lot 400, the three instances there of DA 395, its original 115 for a lunch bar under delegated authority, the amendment to that in February 2018 under delegated authority, the removal of demolition of logo and fuel tax the same. Of course, however, lot 510, number 109, has an approval in 2015 for a warehouse, but then the other two elements there, yes, are under delegated authority. So that's the state of play with respect to the existing approvals under both lots, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. And may I ask if that makes a difference to the
Still
history?
an approval.
Mayor, to reiterate, no, it does not, because, again, the point I made is that they were approved at a certain point in time. Unless there has been a change to the planning framework, a material change, an irrelevant material change to the planning framework since that time, that is not an element that can be reappraised. Whether the council now, or this council now, looks back in retrospect and decides it might have been preferable for reasons raised now for the matter to have been determined by council. The fact of the matter is, following our delegation, it would have had to have met the delegation and been considered to be appropriate to be dealt with by delegation at the time, despite the fact that views might change in 2020, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Russell. Right, thank you, councillors. Now move on to the next item, which is item 4.1, the footpath request for Johnson Street, Guildford, and Miss Rebecca McElroy speaking to the request. Thank you, Miss McElroy.
Hello all, and thank you for letting me speak on a topic I feel quite passionate about, achieving a safe community for my children and my community's children. I'm speaking today against a proposed recommendation of city staff to postpone any safety upgrades to the Johnson Street footpath. On the 7th of February 2017, I wrote to the City of Swan raising concerns about my children's safety riding to and from Guildford Primary School, the oldest operating school in Western Australia, something that should be recognised and celebrated by us all. This email was sent after my son, riding his bike, nearly fell onto Johnson Street on the way to school one morning, a road that the report states takes 23,000 cars per day, driving at 60 kilometres per hour on average. The concerns I raised were about the condition of the Johnson Street pathway. They were broken up, uneven and in bad condition. The width of the pathway in some parts means that you actually have to go off-road to pass someone. As an FYI, it is 1.2 metres wide, which is actually 1980 standards, and is no longer fit for purpose. There's significant drop-offs with no fencing, and the fencing across parts was actually missing and still is, meaning that if my child was to fall off their bike, the chance of them falling onto that busy road was high. Falling the other way was actually down a significant embankment and deep enough to cause significant injury. At this point, the City of Swan approved some grinding works on the pathway and some concrete infilling. That's my terminology. In November 2017, the then Mayor was taken to Johnson Street, and he agreed that the path was inappropriate and not to standard, and importantly, that something needed to be done. These concerns that I raised and the many emails with City of Swan staff, my local councillors and with other members of the community is why this issue is before you today. First, I want to raise my concerns regarding the feedback within the report on the consultation undertaken. I thank my local councillor, Ian Johnson, for reaching out to me this week to ask for my feedback on the report. At no time, even after 2.5 years of following the issue up, emailing, discussing my concerns, was my feedback sought from the City of Swan. For this, I'm extremely disappointed, and I would argue that it's inappropriate, that it was missed, but I'll leave that at that. In addition, the report states that the South Guildford Community Association was consulted. This advice to council is incorrect. I have verified with the chairperson that the SGCA was at no time consulted on the report, so I was not given an opportunity to provide feedback through that method either. I understand that the Guildford Association was consulted with, and I would argue that South Guildford residents would actually use that pathway more often than Guildford residents to get to the school or to the train station, but I digress. I was aware the school had advised another community member, not the City of Swan, that the pathway was not an education issue. At no time has the actual school community been consulted. The parents who actually use the pathway daily, not the leadership of the school who drive in and out of the school daily. So if advice was, in addition, the school has not had a consistent principal since mid-2019. So if the advice was sought from the acting principal, is the City of Swan confident that the issues of the path were actually known or understood? I am aware that one community member has raised concerns about antisocial behaviour that occurred many years ago. I'm not discounting the concerns, but it must be considered that when the report discusses the commentary around community concern, whether this is of an individual or a community. I would argue that my community concern regarding pedestrian safety is more relevant and likely here. Based on the above, I urge you to challenge the content of the report and how accurate the comments on consultation are. If you want to know what a community thinks about an issue, you need to discuss it with the community, and in addition, you as councillors need to be assured that the consultation commentary you're basing your decision on has value. For me, I love Guildford, and I deeply believe that the City of Swan needs to do more to enhance its beauty, its accessibility and its safety. Johnson Street is a great example. It's an entry point into historical Guildford, past beautiful bushland that's so rare in Perth, and past the oldest operating school in WA. What an opportunity. Instead, we have terrible traffic management, falling down fences, broken footpaths, and of most concern is my child's safety being put at risk. I have no experience in this type of planning, so I won't provide you with any commentary on the design options. So let me look at things quite simply.
30 seconds, Ms McElroy.
I'm sorry, I've just got a few more paragraphs. The report has provided you with 3 options. One is for an upper eastern path that increases the safety and accessibility for your community members. One is a lower western path that increases the safety and accessibility for your ratepayers. And the third is an option, if you vote for this one, that states that my child is 80% less likely to die if they fall on a road during school hours. So no action is required. Maybe we should put up some warning signs telling people that. I understand that the argument that work is required on the water paths over the coming years, and why take any action now? I get that. I want to waste my ratepayer dollars less than you. I can assure you of that. But this is the same argument I've given since 2017. It's the same argument as why we don't have safe accessibility under the bridge between Queen's Road and Bridge Street. We now have many more families driving into South Guildford daily.
Thank you, Ms McElroy. That's your 5.5 minutes. Thank you. How much more have you got? Because
Got 2 small paragraphs.
2 very small paragraphs?
Yep. I understand that the work is required.
Thank you.
For me, whether you make a decision on an upper path or lower path has no effect except to potentially save my child's life, or one of his classmates. That being said, the upper path will ensure accessibility for those on mobility aids or I feel quite passionate about this issue and my child's safety, and I'll email the rest of my commentary to councillors. But I urge you to consider change, and I urge you not to leave this issue alone. There's 300 kids at that school that deserve a safe access to that school. As you can tell, I'm quite passionate about this issue, and I'll email my entire deputation to all councillors. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms McElroy. I don't think we'll put you under stress of questions, but councillors, you're welcome to contact Ms McElroy. Okay, item 6.1 is annual meeting.
Questions for staff.
A staff question? Okay, Councillor Callahan. Well, don't fight over it, you won't get one.
Oh.
Councillor Johnson then.
We can. Mr Mayor, a question for staff. Obviously, we've got some costs here. I'm interested to know if and I know this work has been looked at for quite some time. We've had several plans produced. Are these costs on the budget?
Mr. McCoten.
There is some money on the budget, and I don't have it exactly in front of me what it is, but I can circulate that information. But there is some money on the budget, but not enough to do the full options proposed.
Okay. Further question, Councillor Johnson?
Did go ahead. Presumably, we would have to adjust the budget for this safety work.
Obviously. Councillor Calano, your question?
So when's the Water Corporation actually going to get around to their work there?
If you read the report, it says the city will contact the Water Corp and ascertain that, I think, isn't it, Mr. Coaten? That effect?
Estimating in 22-23 financial year.
Councillor Coley, you're next.
Through you, Mayor, is it possible to hurry the Water Corporation along?
I think we were going to ask them to address that design. They'll do it when they do it. Water Corporation, they're a godlike creature under their own. Councillor Scanlon, you had a question?
I'd just like to ask Mr. Corrigan, please, if that timing advice has changed, because when Ms McElroy first started campaigning for this in 2017, it was going to be occurring soon. Has that advice from the Water Corp changed?
Mr. Coaten?
I'm not sure of the exact advice from the Water Corp. This project has been going on for many years, a number of years, and there has been a range of further information that has been found out along the way. I'm not sure of the exact dates or what dates the Water Corp have given us, but this is the most accurate information that we've got at the moment.
Councillor Congleton, you're next.
Thank you very much. A question through to Mr. Coaten. If we were to proceed with B and C, or B or C, what is the timeline that the city could implement the project?
Mr. Coaten?
The upgrading the upper path would probably be able to do that quicker in terms of we wouldn't be disturbing the bed and banks of the river. So the option B, the lower path, there would be sort of that would take longer to get the relevant approvals and things like that. I mean, the designs are reasonably well progressed, so it would just be a matter of putting that into a tender document and calling tenders. So the physical work could be undertaken, obviously, subject to having staff, taking some staff off another project perhaps and putting them onto that one. So, but getting the approvals may take some time with the lower path option.
Sorry.
Further question?
We're not going to put you on the spot, Mr. Coaten.
Ballpark figure?
Ballpark figure, 12 months?
I wouldn't want to provide a figure because I'm sure it would end up being quoted back to me that I said it would be done by a certain date.
I promise not to quote it back to you.
And I trust you that you wouldn't, Councillor Condon.
Councillor Johnson, you got another question?
Another question, Mr. Mayor. In the event we were to go ahead with the upper path and then the Water Corporation come along and do their works, presumably the Water Corporation has to reinstate our path if they disturb it in some way.
Mr. Coaten, is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, that would normally be the way that it would work. I would suggest perhaps in this case that they might put up an argument that we knew they were going to do the work, and it may not be as straightforward as that, but that would certainly be the normal case, yes. They reinstate to the original condition.
Councillor Henderson?
Thanks. I'm a little concerned about this in that I would like to know what other priority works that we have in this domain, and given that we're coming up to our budget session soon, where the money's going to come from for the not just this one, but for instance, we've got inch-wide gaps in the bike path through the Swan Valley with people falling off their bikes and stuff like that. So, what other key priority projects do we have?
Take on notice till the budget session, I would suggest,
Yeah,
Mr. Coaten.
I couldn't give you a complete list. I mean, in any one year we have between 200 and 300 capital projects that are done in the road safety area. There's there's risks associated with this situation. There's a lot of pedestrian risk and road safety risk across the city, so it's not possible to provide a list of things that would compare directly with this. I think, as the Mayor says, the budget sessions, probably the budget process, all those things can be analysed by Council.
Councillor Parry.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just two very quick questions to staff. It says in the report, in the interim, city staff have informed that the Water Corp will be conducting renewal works on one of the pressure mains in the vicinity of the 22-23 year. How many pressure mains are there in that particular area to start off with?
There's two mains there, and one of them is, and there's also another service there that was unidentified at the time. But there's I understand there's two Water Corporation mains there. One of them is significantly deeper than the other one.
So a follow-up question, Mr Mayor, if you don't mind.
Yep.
So what can the West Water Corp guarantee that that particular pressure main will be serviced by 22-23?
I don't know that they can give any guarantees. That's what they've told us when they're anticipating to do it. I don't think they could guarantee that it would happen at that time. But normally with this sort of work, it is reasonably well scheduled and planned. So I'd suggest there'd be a reasonable degree of certainty it would occur then.
One follow-up.
One more question.
One more question. Is it already in their capital works budget for the 22-23 year for the 5-year projections?
I'm not sure what's in their budget, but I'd assume that it would be, because they've told us that that's when they anticipate that it will occur. But I haven't actually seen their 5-year projections.
No more questions, councillors. We'll move on. 6.1 is the annual meeting of electors consideration of motions. There was Mr Patrick Irwin supposed to speak on motion 4. I notice he is not here. That moves Mr Luke Bolton on motion 13. Mr Bolton, you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, councillors and city staff for the opportunity to present tonight. Just wanted to, I guess, add to the deputation and make some comments on what was given back. Firstly, in regards to shade sales and shade for Woodbridge Riverside Park. It is a brilliant park. It attracts people from both the immediate area, the greater metro and regional parts of Western Australia, as well as interstate travellers who come there to meet with families. It's a really good meeting point from both ends of the metro area. I'd like to present, I did mention that I had a petition which attracted 200 signatures. I did it from the 28th of August to about the 14th of September. There's approximately 200 signatures there on the 3 motions that I presented at the last meeting. I guess I just noted that the city could consider additional shade structures. I just wanted to reiterate that there is a real need for it. Both we've heard about climate action tonight, but we have children down there. I provide sunblock free of charge, but there's lots of kids coming down there. I think we could have more people attending the park if we had greater shade. The planting of 20 trees to be planted is fantastic and encouraging. I would think you'd need to also look at some sort of permanent shade structures, particularly over the barbecues. They're not being used to their full capacity. Second point in regards to antisocial behaviour. Now, the city has sort of responded saying they haven't had many reports of antisocial behaviour. I'd challenge that. I see a fair amount of it there, a fair amount of damage to the park, cars damaged as well, people camping for 2-3 days with their caravans or their camper vans out in the car park. We called an ambulance on Monday for someone who had a drug overdose. These things might not be reported to the City of Swan, or they might not be reported to the police, but they are still occurring. And then I suppose that it was mentioned the high cost and maintenance of vandalism should you erect shade sails is actually, I think, an acknowledgement that there is an issue that could be addressed through greater lighting, ambient lighting. And the other advantage of having additional lighting in that park is for further activation for community events, twilight markets, community cinema, things like that are some things which I think the community has been very clear with me they've got an appetite for, and that could be managed better if we had some better lighting. And I suppose the last one, I'm trying to remember what it was, I've been sitting there for so long you'd think I'd know. The parking issue. it looks at first pass that you've got good parking down there, and it has been acknowledged on the weekends. We've got the park run every Saturday. It gets very full. And I think it's a bit of a cop-out for side streets to be utilised. I've had people with mobility issues that don't have ACROD permits that either don't come to the park or have to be dropped off at the bottom, then picked up. People are coming in with eskies, picnics, etc. Also, local residents having their side streets choked with cars is a bit of an issue. What I'd propose is you've got the contaminated area adjacent to the park, which is a former tip, which you won't be developing in any great rate, but you could put an asphalt overflow car park down there, which could be closed off during the week, but could be opened by the ranger on the weekends, which would allow that overflow park and access to the park itself. I think given the great work that's been done in terms of renovating the public facilities to create better toilet facilities, ambulant, you're positioning yourself to be able to take more people into the park. I think parking would just be something which would be very important. So really that's about it. It's been interesting sitting here tonight and hearing a lot of the other issues. I just see that this is such a great park and it's being so well used, and it's also being so well looked after, and there's more development that could be done there, and I'd like to sort of see it happen as well. So I'd like to present you with these signatures, and thank you for the time to present.
Thank you, Mr Bolton. We've got a couple of quick questions, councillors, by some chance. Councillor Richardson. Well, Councillor Scanlon's doing a finger pointing, so... Okay, staff, okay. Okay, thank you, Mr Bolton.
Well, thank you.
Councillor Scanlon.
Can I give that to you? Cheers.
Thank you. My question is regarding parking on the open space. I'd like to ask the staff if that's possible.
Mr Coaten.
There's a number of issues that would have to be considered with parking there. So physically, it would be possible. There's at the time, a number of the residents, when the original car park was built, a number of the residents objected to, because of the overlooking of their views and things like that, and objected to the play space and the parking in the area. So it's, you know, it is possible that they would object to that. There'd have to be some work done looking at the actual condition of the surface there. That is a contaminated site, and when the original car park and the original work was constructed, it was required to cart a lot of the material off-site to a certain, I think it might have been a Class 4 landfill up in Red Hill, which at one stage it looked like we might have to truck it to South Australia to dispose of it. So it is quite a contaminated site. So there's, if we do have to do some earthworks there, it will be to construct a car park, a formal car park. It would be quite an expensive exercise, and I would suggest that we would get objections from the people overlooking there. So yes, it's physically possible, but it wouldn't be easy.
Thank you, Mr Curtin. Councillor Richard.
I just had a quick question for staff. Just out of curiosity, why that soil will be going to South Australia instead of here?
It didn't end up going there, but this was a number of years ago, and at the time there weren't any landfill cells that were open that could take that. So the EMRC ended up opening one up for us, so we were able to cart it up there, but at one stage it looked like it would have to be trucked interstate.
Thank you, Mr Coaten. No further questions? Thank you, councillors. Now brings us to item C 3.2, which is the confidential item. So we need to go behind closed doors for that one. Well, you got him down here to do a deputation. He's got a deputation here.
Yeah, but the deputation doesn't have to be. Is Mr Cole here?
So, is the guy here? So he didn't walk out, did he?
No.
Okay, cool.
Is Mr Cole there? Just check.
Just check, Phil, that he might have wanted. Do you know him, dear?
Yeah, right. Yeah, we need to go behind the closed doors. We've got to turn it off. Are you going behind closed doors?
Well, it's a confidential item, so we don't know what's going to be said.
Are we still on? We have around 1,500 lots. We have 4 estates, the largest one being St Leonard's Estate. We've also done some development in Caversham as well. We have Suffolk Park. The district open space itself is to cater for Caversham, Dayton and Brabham. It will provide playing fields, tennis courts, community facilities, etc. Within Dayton, there's about 1,600 lots that have been constructed and complete, and there's probably about another 4,000 between Caversham and Brabham at my estimate. The district open space can't be constructed currently due to constraints around water. So the district open space itself is funded through the developer contribution plan, and we've put in around $25 million into this development plan, and essentially that's the community putting it in because the buyers have bought the lots and then they've paid for the, in essence, the DCP. Currently, the funds as of end of financial year last year, there's $25 million in the coffers for the development of DCP items, one of them being the district open space. I've met with council numerous times to try and progress the spending of this $25 million to provide infrastructure for the community. And the major constraint, the impediment at the moment is the actual water licences. So I understand council has been trying to procure water licences and to facilitate this, but without the water licences, it's very difficult to spend this money, which has been sitting in the bank for a while. And so really the communities of the 3 suburbs should have these facilities, and the money needs to get spent so that people can have footy ovals and they can have the facilities that they expect are coming at some point in time. So really all I'm saying is I encourage council to acquire water licences or facilitate it in some other way, and we're fully behind trying to get this infrastructure into the community.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. Any questions to Councillor Henderson?
In that area, is there a Mirrabooka aquifer available?
To be honest, I'm not that familiar with the water licences that are required, that council would require to purchase to facilitate it. So maybe one of the planners is better to answer.
Okay. Any further questions, councillors? Okay, Councillor Henderson, you've got to bounce off the staff if anyone knows.
Leadable water is very valuable, and I don't see that wasted. To be blunt, on parks when Mirrabooka is a lower quality, but it's still usable. So I want to know if there's a Mirrabooka aquifer available throughout that area.
Anyone want to take that on, Mr. Caton?
I could answer.
I'll have to take that on notice and get back to you.
My understanding is there was no water allocation available, and that's been the whole hold-up with this project.
In Mirrabooka?
Mirrabooka, anything. You could not get a licence to get water in this area. And for that reason, development approvals are now changing. You won't be able to get a subdivision unless we've got water allocation.
Councillor Coley.
Through you, Mayor. Rob, thanks for coming in at this late hour.
No problem.
I'm interested to know what the expectation of Dayton residents was, and what is it currently going forward in respect of the water and the district public open space.
Well, I think the expectation from the residents is that when we sell the land, we explain to them that within the structure plan there's an allocation for a district open space, and it's going to be funded by a developer contribution scheme, and as such they expect at some point in time that the facilities will be provided, generally in accordance with the timelines that are in the developer contribution plan. Now, my understanding is that council, within the district open space, there's 2 sections. There's about a quarter of it is technically deemed a public open space, and about 3/4 of it is a district open space. And my understanding is that the council this financial year is proceeding somewhat with a portion of the POS area, and some of that will progress. I don't know the details of that, but I've been told that's progressing. The expectation from the community is that it's going to happen, and the faster that it can get there, the better it is. Because at the moment, council's purchased the land for the district open space, but really there's nothing that's gone on for a number of years, probably 5-6 years since we sold our land to council. It's just fenced off, and it's not particularly sightly, and it's sort of in the middle of a suburban area, so it's just sitting there. All the residents would love something to be done. We'd love something to be done. We just encourage that $25 million that's sitting there to be spent.
The expectation's pretty clear. Councillor Kalano?
I was just wondering, with the water allocation issues, maybe that there might have to be some kind of different approach to the district open space. Is there anything that you could kind of imagine or think of that might take the place of that would satisfy, the residents, but also, you and your future development of that area?
Sure. I think it's a balance. You need some green areas, but if you had potentially had something like AstroTurf hockey fields or tennis courts or netball courts or something, you could potentially use more of the space and not have to irrigate it as much. The final design, I'm not sure if it's been completed, but the designs that I've seen do have some of those. But potentially, if there's water issues, you could look at providing more of that rather than, just big football fields.
Thank you, Mr. Cole.
No worries.
Okay, councillors, that takes care of all the deputations. So I'm just going to run through the items and ask those that you wish to withdraw. And I'm again going to ask you your intent. 13.6 is the proposed classrooms. I'm going for the top of the ones who do deputations, and I'll do the ones that are left. Okay. So 13.6 is the proposed classroom additions at Suffolk Street. Councillor Zanino, and your intent would be? Okay, Councillor Johnson, you've already indicated a motion that was to alternate. Okay, 1.6 is the Midland Activity Centre design. Councillor Scanlon, your intention is to do?
Alternate motion.
Alternate motion. 1.7 is the Midland Oval Redevelopment Urban Guidelines. Councillor Scanlon again.
Alternate.
An amendment or an alternate?
Can I get that to you later?
Yep, as soon as possible, but Monday would be good. 3.1 is the proposed amendment to 178 local planning scheme for Tipper Court General Industrial to special use.
Yes.
Again, Councillor Scanlon, what's your intent there?
My intent is to refuse it, but however I'm meeting with Hazelmere Progress Association tomorrow to discuss it further, so
okay.
I'll get it to you.
3.2 is the local development plan for Morrison Road West.
Yes. Oh, Ian can do it.
We'll work it out. Who's doing it?
Ian.
I'll do it.
And your intention, Councillor Johnson?
Alternate motion, but to be determined, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, I missed the last bit.
I do intend to propose something, but I'm not certain yet what I'm going to do.
So it's going to be an amendment? Yes. 3.5 is the change of use of shed to ancillary dwelling in Gidgegunup. Yep. Councillor Zeno. Intent would be? Approval. Okay, subject to conditions, yeah, I guess. 3.6, the proposed reception centre, Hammersley Road. Yep. Refusal. 3.8 is the proposed shopping centre in Panage Way, Brabham. None. The hot item, the 3.9, the crematorium. No. 3.12 is the proposed extension of time for the lunch bar in Clayton Street.
Yes, yeah. Mr. Mayor.
Bellevue. And, well, Councillor Scanlon's already indicated she wants to do something there, and yours is a refusal, I think, wasn't it, Councillor?
Yes.
Okay, 4.1 is the footpath in Johnson Street.
Yes, Mr Mayor.
4A.
Alternate for, I think, option C.
Okay. 6.1 is the annual meeting of electors, consideration of motions.
Yes. Oh.
Okay, so you want to do something different with one? Which one? And Councillor Scanlon, I think you had your hand up for something too, didn't you?
Yes, thank you, I do. Sorry, there's quite a few motions. Motion 4, motion 7, motion... I'm not sure about motion 10, motion 11, motion 12, motion 13, motion 15, motion 16, motion 17.
And you intend to do what?
Alternate to the officer's recommendations.
Okay, the remaining items, 13.5. Councillor Henderson. Oh, sorry, 3.2, the confidential item. No one? An amendment. Okay, 13.5. Councillor Henderson, you indicated something. You might as well do them now because that's what we're here for.
It's favourable to another another candidate. If it's detrimental to one, it's favourable to another, isn't it?
Well, that's what I'm trying to get. It's one-sided.
Well, it could be the other side too. If you take the other person's point of view, it could be beneficial for them.
Maybe. Well,
but what make a point, and that is that
We can ask a
actually
question.
the point that you're saying is that. Well, the question then is that is it enough to say that it favours a candidate? Because if it's actually, positively detrimenting a candidate and not favouring anybody, then is that covered by that provision? I think probably not. And I agree with you there. You have to be explicit in your drafting. Otherwise, it can be narrowed down and in the end, that wasn't explicitly about detriment to a candidate, so therefore it doesn't apply.
Ms. Albright, do you want to comment on that?
Thank you. Through you, Mr Mayor. Whilst I'm open to a change there, I guess this was about media activities generally are to promote the activities of councillors or candidates. So this was about not undertaking promotional activities that would favour a candidate. That's why the emphasis is on favour. We wouldn't generally run media campaigns at the city that would be detrimental to anyone, I would hope.
Absolutely understood. There were a staff member that had a right or something, and something got through. By having all detrimental to in there, that clearly makes it a motivation to be square.
Okay. Councillor Congerton.
Thank you. Can I just have some consultation in terms of clarity on the 30 days prior to the start of local government caretaker period? Is that from election day? Can you tell me when the 30-day period?
Ms. Albright.
Through you, Mr Mayor. So the proposal is that this policy would be apply from the close of nominations through so that's 37 days prior to the election. I think the reference in the policy around 30 days was that the CEO will give staff notice 30 days before the close of nominations that the policy will apply, and then it will apply from close of nominations through to the election.
37 no.
Correct.
Councillor Anderson.
Top of page 23, 4.11. Could I suggest that it should read candidates' request on behalf of elected residents and ratepayers during the caretaker period? Because that paragraph doesn't refer to the caretaker period.
Ms. Albright.
Through you, Mr Mayor, the policy relates to the caretaker period.
As long as it's clear, and I understand your point, whereas in other parts it is mentioned regularly.
Well, the item is caretaker period. So next question.
13, for 13, same point, caretaker period. And then the next one, under 414, paragraph 2, you're talking about staff not being able to erect or display signs. I would suggest that's a violation of their rights if they want to put a sign up of a candidate on their lawn. Can I comment on that?
Comment, Ms. Albright.
I've got a view that I don't believe that staff should get involved in council elections.
I understand that, Mr CEO, and certainly from a working perspective, they may live in the community and not known by people that they actually work for the city. The point is I'm saying about their political rights to put up a sign up on their lawn, I think this would violate that. I'm just simply raising a point.
Well, I believe if that's what staff want to do, they should take leave during that period of time. They should stay out of the process.
Okay, I raised the point. That's it.
Yeah.
Thank you. I might have an amendment, Mayor, to that item.
You might or you will?
I will.
Okay, 1.1 is a policy review for subdividers' contributions for Henley Brook Drive, Henley Brook North Park and Millhouse Road. None. 1.2 is a policy review for Hazelmere Residential Area Drainage Improvement Fund. Possibly an amendment.
Wrong one. So I got the wrong one there.
Okay. 1.3 is a policy review for Guildford and South Guildford Drainage. 1.4 is the policy review for Midland District Drainage Reserve Fund. 2.1 is the Guildford Hazelmere Local Area Plan.
That's the one I might have an amendment for. Thank you.
And when will you know?
Monday.
Close off. And what would be your intent, or you got no idea? Well, Councillor, the whole idea is so. Yeah, that'd be handy if you could do that, because then we can give it due consideration rather than having them popping up at lunchtime on a Wednesday. So we deal with that one. 3.3 is the construction of third-party advertising signage on Marshall Road. 3.4 is a proposed change of use to community purpose demolition and construction of the patio on Spring Park Road, Midland. 3.7 is agriculture intensive mushroom farm on West Swan Road. Councillor Zeno, to do. Okay, 3.10 is the transport depot in Bullsbrook. Councillor McCulloch has indicated an amendment. 3.11 is the request for extension of planning approval for the registered sales office car park display centre in Windermere Boulevard in Averley. 3.13 is extension of approval for shed and lean-to in Hazelmere Circle, Hazelmere. 3.14, extension of development term for Lot 3, Lowton Avenue, Midland. 3.15, statutory planning decisions on delegated authority. 4.2, proposed dedication of 3 portion of lots as a road in Daviett Road. Shopping trolleys. List of accounts paid. Financial report. Advocacy priorities for 2021. Councillor Henderson.
Why is the Swan Valley
don't want to do it.
Basically, because council resolved to leave it where it was, in Guildford.
Which was on the list.
To leave it where it is right now. So why do we need money for?
Well, I thought we resolved to keep it on the list.
Not to my knowledge.
No, we can deal with it next advocacy meeting.
I'll
And
check it, but as far as I'm aware, it was to leave it where it is. We don't do any more work on it. So there's no, you were going to do something, councillor. You were going to go and get the money, but it's not on our advocacy list, the council's advocacy list. Yes, that's right. You were going to go. I think that was the council. I will follow up the recommendation and get back to you.
Yep. And that only leaves, councillors, that only leaves us the items. Oh, you want? Well, go on then. Come on in. Ask a question.
The confirmation that the traffic management system proposals under the Black Spot funding are in place at Belton and Hepburn.
That's slightly different decision. Not on the
Well,
list, but carry on.
that will.
Well, hang on a second. You better wait and listen to Jim.
Well, the staff will definitely be putting in a black spot submission for that project, if that answers your question. It'll happen in the. I'll get back to you on the exact timing.
No, Councillor Johnson was first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, just reading down this list, I might be missing something here, but I can't see the pedestrian underpass under the Helena River at Johnson Street. No relation. Shouldn't that be on the list? The advocacy priority.
There was an agreement that Main Roads were going to do that when they upgrade the road.
Correct.
Yep. Main Roads agreed to do that when they upgrade the bridge. Councillor Kylie.
So what that means is the advocacy has been successful and it's going ahead.
Well, they agreed to do it.
But they haven't
said when yet. So, Councillor Kylie, you had a question?
Well, my question then is, if we don't actually have a definite agreement, shouldn't it stay on the advocacy priority list until they've given us the money? Or they're
not going to give us the money. They're actually going to do it.
Until they're going to do it.
They're going to do it themselves when they upgrade the bridge, whenever that will be.
Well,
so they've agreed to do it. So you want us to advocate for the bridge?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's on their forward planning already. So you can check that, Jim. Councillor Kylie?
No, we'll follow that one up.
My question, Mayor, is that on that list there seems to be a mix of state priorities and council priorities.
Federal and state.
State and federal, yeah.
Well, road improvements that seem to be in the interest of the state rather than directly from the council. I'm just wondering, are we able to separate that list out as to say who's benefiting here? Is it the residents and ratepayers of the City of Swan, or is it through traffic? People from, is it a state benefit? It just seems to be a mix of very expensive items that doesn't necessarily benefit the ratepayer of the City of Swan, but they also share in it. I'm just wondering if you could divide it up somehow to state interest or metropolitan interest items or advocacy items and City of Swan items.
Well, Mr. CEO?
Well, I would have thought any project going through the City of Swan has benefits to ratepayers of the City of Swan. If you take Northlink, which is going to be opened in 2 weeks' time.
2 weeks, yeah.
The benefits is that it's taking traffic off Great Northern Highway. It's taking traffic off probably 20 or 30 other roads like West Swan Road, etc., etc. If it's the quick movement of heavy vehicles like interchanges through the City of Swan, that also benefits
traffic flow.
Traffic flow also benefits residents of the City of Swan because it makes those roads safer because it cuts out traffic lights.
And as would be the orange route, which takes traffic off Great Eastern High all the way through to Mundaring.
Now, if we don't advocate for those for our residents,
who does?
Who does? Because, and you can't ask the ministers to do it. They're going to put in. We are advocating to ministers to get funding from state and federal. That's why there's a mix, Mr. Mayor.
The point I'm making is that when you get those really expensive items, that it looks like the City of Swan potentially the only beneficiaries when it actually is the whole state or the whole metropolitan Perth benefiting from the item. That it's not just about.
Yeah, no, not.
And there could be surrounding councils that actually could be benefiting from this as well,
Yeah,
who could also advocate on our behalf.
Well, you would call it the orange route is a joint project advocacy between Northern Mundaring and City of Swan. So that's an example. Councillor Johnson.
Examples there
This classic example. And I think Kalamunda had input and Belmont with the interchanges on Roe Highway.
Yep.
So yeah, there's a joint. Councillor Johnson.
My question is, Mr Mayor, then following on from the previous rationale for missing an item off, why is the orange route on this list? Because, as I understand it, it's funded and going ahead. And I guess there are other questions around it, so why is it there?
There's funding for planning. There's no funding being allocated for
the build.
construction. For the build.
And I think the second point to make is I'm not entirely convinced that this is in the interests of the residents of the City of Swan. I've had a lot of feedback from people in Jane Brook.
The orange route is no benefit to the City of Swan. I would suggest you want to go to Gidgegan up and ask the residents there, having a dual carriageway down the hill. Councillor Henderson, Councillor Zanino, I think that's been the major impetus, hasn't it? Extremely. They've been screaming about it for years.
I think there's a lot of people in Jane Brook who are a bit surprised to learn about the orange route.
Well,
the orange route was planned a long time before Jane Brook even existed, Councillor, so buyer beware. Right, Councillors, that only leaves us with
Mr. Mayor?
Councillor Scanlon, yes.
Sorry, I neglected to mention when I was withdrawing item 6.1 that I'll be dividing each one up individually into individual motions as I emailed earlier.
Well, in that case, Councillor, you'll need a motion for Councillor to do that, and we'll take that to deal that with those motions separately.
Did you?
That will give you somewhere in the vicinity of, at my last count, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32 individual motions next week. I suggest you book out 3 nights next week.
Mr. Mayor,
no,
can we
it's not quite that many. Sorry.
Not that many.
Previously, we've
list.
moved on block those that no one has got any alternate for, and we've taken those that councillors have alternate motions for individually.
Yeah, that's fine, but Councillor Scanlon just indicated she wanted to do them all.
Individually.
Every single one of them.
No, not every single one, only the ones that I mentioned. Not every single one.
That's what I just said. Right? No,
Yes. So, following the email I sent to you...
you gave me the list there already, Councillor.
Yes.
Individual ones. You already gave me that list.
Yes.
So I don't know what you're saying. You just
I
already told me
just
that.
wanted to clarify that they'll be individually
Thank you.
spoken
As long as you
about.
understand that you've already given to me. Councillor
Thank
Parry.
you.
Just getting back to the advocacy one. Because of the major changes in regards to the Metronet line, we're still advocating for the Whiteman Park open regional space as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Have a look. It's in the
Double
report.
checking, that's all.
Councillor Henderson.
Just in regard to the values on these, our key one, the leisure centre, it says 55 million, but should it say 30 mil because we've already got 25 mil been committed?
No, total value of the project.
Total value, 55 million.
So, yeah, but hang on, we've got to get another 30 mil, right? From somewhere.
Well,
we've already got 25.
We've already got 25 plus 7 from the state, which we've already spent some. So we're using the total value of the project as the value of the project.
It's just misleading, that's all. Okay, thanks.
Still take 50 million if someone wants to give it. Councillor Lucas?
Yes, and I'll be looking at and discussing with our advocacy employee about why has aged care dropped off there. We've still got Elvira, Lockridge, and obviously we've got a special meeting coming up on Balladura aged care. I think aged care still needs to be on there in some regard.
Okay. Anyone else? Councillor McNamara.
I need to ask a directional question now. I know you have 2 more items.
No, I don't have to do the parts. Yep.
So can I ask a question? I want to ask a question.
On the item on the agenda?
No, that's my point. But
Okay, well, there's no general business today, Councillor. You can ask it next week in members' questions.
Yes.
Okay?
Would you let me finish, please, Mr. Mayor, and I will explain why I need to ask this question now. May I?
Okay, let's hear it. Yeah.
Right. The reason I need to ask this question is for that special meeting that the Deputy Mayor just mentioned, and the staff have to prepare stuff for that meeting from this question, and they will need the time. If I wait until next week, then they definitely won't have the answers, and they won't have the preparation done. They need the preparation. So I need to ask them the question. Do I just write to them, or do I just...
Yep, go for your life. Write to them. Yep. So get it to them tomorrow.
The report's been prepared.
that's
So they bring
basically the reason. It's out of courtesy to the staff. I've already asked Mr. Tan the question when the story. So
Yep, get it to him. Okay, councillors, on that, thank you very much. Oh,
directional question. I want to know where the minutes are gone for the last meeting. I know this is a general thing, but there's no minutes. There's no minutes of the last on board books. And what's this falling against? Do we use
Sorry?
it next week or do
They may not be on board books, but they're online.
the main number of books, they're online if you go on the internet, apparently.
Yeah.
Okay.
Once there's four, once there's against.
Right, I'll give you a copy. Thank you, councillors. Those working on alternate motions, I encourage you to get on with it. You've got a week.